3 days ago, she was publicly humiliated and cast aside like trash. Tonight, bleeding and half frozen in a blizzard, she's about to make a choice that will change everything. This is the story of Lyra Vale, the Omega no one wanted, who became the queen no one saw coming. If you love stories where the underdog rises, where courage defeats cruelty, and where love finds you in the most brutal places, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I know where you're watching from. Trust me, you won't believe how this ends. The rejection happened on a Tuesday. Lyra Vale would remember that detail for the rest of her life, not because Tuesdays held any particular significance, but because it was such an ordinary day for such an extraordinary humiliation. The sun had been shining. Birds were singing in the pine trees surrounding the Iron Ridge Pack's central grounds. Children were laughing as they played near the training fields. And there, in front of 200 witnesses, Alpha Ronan Hale looked into her eyes and spoke the words that shattered her world. I, Ronan Hale, Alpha of the Iron Ridge Pack, reject you, Lyra Vale, as my mate. The mate bond, that sacred, unbreakable connection that was supposed to be a gift from the universe itself, snapped like a frozen branch. The pain drove Lyra to her knees. She heard gasps from the crowd. She heard whispers. She heard someone laugh. Ronan stood above her, his handsome face twisted with disgust, as if her very existence offended him. An Omega, he said, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. The moon blessed me with an Omega, a weak, powerless nothing. Lyra's wolf whimpered inside her, bleeding from a wound that had nothing to do with claws or teeth. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But Omegas didn't fight Alphas. That wasn't how the world worked. Ronan's beta, Marcus, stepped forward and placed a hand on his Alpha's shoulder. Ronan, this is my choice, Ronan interrupted coldly. I will not be shackled to weakness. The Iron Ridge Pack deserves a Luna who can stand beside me as an equal, not some trembling Omega who can barely shift without permission. The crowd murmured in agreement. Some looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge their Alpha. Others nodded, their eyes hard with the same prejudice that had followed Lyra her entire life. She was an Omega, the lowest rank in the pack hierarchy. Weak, submissive, worthless. That's what they'd always told her. And now, even fate itself seemed to agree. Lyra forced herself to stand. Her legs shook. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed in front of these people. She met Ronan's eyes one last time and saw nothing there. No regret, no second thoughts, just cold certainty. I accept your rejection, she whispered. The words tasted like ash. Ronan turned his back on her and walked away, his shoulders squared, his head high. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. Within moments, he was gone, swallowed by the pack house, already moving on with his life as if she had never mattered at all. Lyra stood alone in the center of the grounds, surrounded by wolves who wouldn't meet her eyes. Her best friend Sarah pushed through the crowd and wrapped her arms around Lyra's shoulders. Come on, Sarah whispered urgently. Let's get you out of here. But there was nowhere to go. This was her pack. These were her people. This was supposed to be her home. That night, Lyra lay in her small room on the edge of pack territory and stared at the ceiling. The physical pain of the broken bond had faded to a dull, constant ache, but the emotional wound was deeper. She replayed the rejection over and over in her mind, searching for something she could have done differently, some way she could have been enough. But the truth was simple and brutal. She had never been given a chance. The next day, the whispers started. Did you hear? Ronan rejected his mate. Can you blame him? An Omega Luna? That's embarrassing. I heard she begged him to reconsider. Lyra hadn't begged. She had accepted his decision with what little dignity she had left. But facts didn't matter when gossip was more entertaining. By the second day, even Sarah's comfort felt hollow. Her friend meant well, but what could she say? That everything would be okay? That Lyra would find another mate? Both of them knew the truth. Rejected wolves rarely recovered. The mate bond was sacred, and breaking it left scars that never fully healed. On the third day, Lyra made her decision. She packed a small bag with the few possessions she owned, a change of clothes, a wool blanket, a knife her father had given her before he died. and a small leather journal where she used to write poems she never showed anyone. She waited until nightfall, when most of the pack was gathered in the main hall for the weekly feast, and slipped away into the forest. No one tried to stop her. No one even noticed. The Iron Ridge territory stretched for miles through dense pine forests and rocky hills. But Lyra knew these woods. She had spent her childhood exploring them, finding quiet places where she could escape the constant reminders of her low rank. She moved quickly, driven by a desperate need to put distance between herself and the only home she'd ever known. By midnight, she reached the border. Pack territories were sacred. Crossing into another pack's land without permission was a death sentence, and the neutral zones between territories were dangerous, home to rogues, predators, and wolves who had been exiled for crimes too terrible to forgive. Lyra stood at the border marker, a stone cairn that had stood for generations, and looked back toward Iron Ridge. Somewhere in that direction was the pack house, warm and bright, filled with wolves who belonged. She turned away and walked into the wilderness. The first night alone was the hardest. Lyra found a small cave nestled between two massive boulders and built a fire with trembling hands. The temperature had dropped sharply after sunset, and her breath came out in white clouds. She wrapped herself in her blanket and sat as close to the flames as she dared, listening to the forest around her. Wolves howled in the distance. Something large moved through the underbrush nearby. The wind carried the scent of snow. Winter was coming early this year. Everyone in Iron Ridge had been preparing for it, stockpiling food, reinforcing shelters, organizing hunting parties. Lyra had nothing but the clothes on her back and a blanket that wouldn't keep her warm once the real cold arrived. She should have been terrified. Part of her was. But another part, the part that had endured years of being overlooked, dismissed, and belittled, felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to pretend. She didn't have to smile through the casual cruelty or bow her head to wolves who treated her like furniture. She didn't have to see pity in Sarah's eyes or contempt in Ronan's. Out here, she was no one, but that meant she could be anyone. The second day brought rain. Lyra walked north, following game trails and streams, searching for something she couldn't name. Other packs? A rogue community that might accept her? She didn't know. She just knew she couldn't go back. By afternoon, the rain turned to sleet. Lyra's clothes were soaked through, and her fingers had gone numb. She found shelter under an overhang of rock and tried to start a fire, but the wood was too wet. She sat shivering, her teeth chattering so hard they hurt, and wondered if this was how she would die, alone, frozen, forgotten. "No," she said aloud, her voice barely audible over the storm. "No, I didn't survive Ronan just to die out here." Her wolf stirred inside her, weak but defiant. Lyra closed her eyes and focused on shifting. It was harder for Omegas. Everything was harder for Omegas, but she managed it. Her bones cracked and reformed, her muscles stretched, and fur sprouted across her skin. When the shift completed, she was smaller than most wolves, her coat a pale silver gray that blended with the winter landscape. In wolf form, the cold was more bearable. Her enhanced senses picked up the scent of a deer somewhere downwind. She was hungry. She'd barely eaten since leaving Iron Ridge, but hunting alone was dangerous. Wolves were pack animals for a reason. Still, she had no choice. Lyra tracked the deer for over an hour, moving silently through the sleet. When she finally found it, a young buck with an injured leg, she hesitated. In a pack, the Omega would never be allowed to make the kill. That honor went to the higher ranks. Omegas ate last, and only if there was enough left over. But there was no pack here, no hierarchy, no rules except survival. Lyra attacked. The fight was brutal and clumsy. She had never been trained to hunt alone, and the deer was desperate. It kicked her in the ribs, knocking the wind from her lungs, and ran. Lyra pursued, ignoring the pain, driven by hunger and instinct. When the deer stumbled on its injured leg, she leaped and sank her teeth into its throat. The kill wasn't clean. It took too long. But when it was over, Lyra stood panting over her first solo kill, blood on her muzzle, her heart pounding with a mixture of triumph and shame. She ate quickly, tearing into the warm meat, and then dragged the carcass back to her shelter. It would feed her for days if she could keep scavengers away. That night, full for the first time in days, Lyra shifted back to human form and sat by the fire she'd finally managed to start. She looked at her hands, scratched, dirty, trembling, and felt something shift inside her. She had survived her first hunt. She had kept herself alive in a place designed to kill the weak. Maybe she wasn't as powerless as everyone believed. The third day dawned clear and brutally cold. Lyra woke to find frost coating the inside of her shelter and her water frozen solid. The storm had passed, but the temperature had plummeted. She could see her breath even inside the cave. She knew she couldn't stay here. The cave provided minimal shelter, and once the real winter storms arrived, she would freeze. She needed to find better protection, a deeper cave, an abandoned den, something that could keep out the worst of the cold. Lyra packed her meager supplies and set out, moving deeper into the neutral territory. The landscape here was wild and unforgiving, jagged cliffs, frozen streams, forests so dense the sun barely penetrated. She saw signs of other wolves, scent markers, claw marks on trees, old kills, but encountered no one. That should have been comforting. Instead, it made her feel more alone than ever. By midday, the wind had picked up, carrying with it the sharp, metallic scent of incoming snow. Lyra's instinct screamed at her to find shelter immediately. She'd lived through enough winters to know what was coming, a blizzard and a bad one. She moved faster, almost running, her eyes scanning the cliffs for any sign of a cave or overhang. Behind her, the sky had turned a sickly gray-green, and the first fat snowflakes were beginning to fall. Then she heard it. A howl. Distant, carried on the wind, but unmistakable. Another wolf. Lyra froze, her heart hammering. Rogues? A rival pack? Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. A lone Omega in neutral territory was easy prey for wolves looking to assert dominance or simply looking for entertainment. She should run. She should hide. Every instinct told her to avoid other wolves at all costs. But something about that howl made her pause. It wasn't a challenge or a territorial warning. It wasn't the coordinated call of a hunting pack. It was pain. Someone, something, was hurt. Lyra stood at a crossroads, the wind whipping snow around her, and felt the weight of a decision she didn't want to make. She could keep moving, find shelter, focus on her own survival. That was the smart choice, the safe choice. Or she could follow that sound into the storm, the Omega who had spent her entire life being told she was weak, who had been rejected and humiliated and cast aside, looked toward the sound of pain and made a choice that defied every lesson she'd been taught. She ran toward the howl. The storm hit with terrifying speed. One moment, Lyra could see 20 feet ahead. The next, the world was a white wall of wind and snow. She shifted to wolf form, using her enhanced senses to navigate, following the scent she'd caught on the wind. Blood, fresh and heavy. The howl came again, weaker this time, and closer. Lyra pushed forward, her paws sinking into the rapidly accumulating snow. Her fur provided some protection from the cold, but the wind cut through like knives. She couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. If she lost the scent trail, she'd be lost herself. There. A dark shape in the snow ahead. Lyra approached cautiously, her body low, ready to flee if this was a trap. But as she got closer, she realized the shape wasn't moving. It was a wolf. Massive, far larger than any she'd ever seen, lying motionless in a growing pool of blood. The wolf's coat was black as midnight, and even unconscious, it radiated power. An alpha, Lyra realized with shock. And not just any alpha. This wolf was covered in wounds, deep gashes across its ribs, a vicious bite on its shoulder, claw marks raked across its back. It had been in a brutal fight and barely escaped with its life. Lyra shifted to human form, ignoring the immediate bite of the cold, and knelt beside the fallen wolf. Up close, the damage was even worse. The wolf was bleeding out, its breathing shallow and labored. It was dying. Every rational thought in Lyra's head told her to leave. This wasn't her problem. This wolf was too big, too dangerous, and saving it would cost her resources she couldn't afford to waste. Besides, if this alpha died, it was probably because it had done something to deserve it. But Lyra looked at the dying wolf and saw herself 3 days ago, broken, bleeding, left to die by people who should have cared. "Damn it," she whispered. She couldn't leave it. She wouldn't. Lyra ran back to where she'd seen a cluster of pine trees and broke off branches with her bare hands, ignoring the sap that stuck to her skin and the needles that cut her palms. She dragged the branches back to the wolf, and arranged them into a makeshift shelter, using her body to block the worst of the wind. Then she got to work. She had basic healing knowledge, all wolves did, to some extent, but these injuries were severe. The worst wound was on the wolf's shoulder, where something had bitten clean through muscle. Lyra tore strips from her spare shirt and pressed them against the wound, using pressure to slow the bleeding. The wolf didn't stir. "Come on," Lyra muttered through chattering teeth. "Don't you dare die on me now." She worked through the night, the storm raging around her pathetic shelter, keeping pressure on wounds, using snow to clean injuries, doing everything she could with almost nothing to work with. Her hands were numb. Her entire body was shaking from cold and exhaustion. At some point, she started talking to the unconscious wolf, just to keep herself awake. "You know, this is insane," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I have no idea who you are. You're probably some terrible alpha who deserved to get torn apart. And here I am, freezing to death, trying to save you." The wolf's breathing remained shallow but steady. "3 days ago, my mate rejected me," Lyra continued, surprising herself. She'd never told anyone this, not even Sarah. "In front of the entire pack, called me weak, worthless. He wasn't wrong, probably. I mean, look at me. I can't even build a proper shelter." She pressed harder on the shoulder wound as fresh blood seeped through the makeshift bandages. "But you know what? I killed a deer yesterday, all by myself. It wasn't pretty, and I'm pretty sure I did it all wrong, but I did it. And right now I'm keeping you alive in a blizzard with nothing but pine branches and strips of my shirt. So maybe I'm not as worthless as everyone thinks." The words hung in the frozen air. Lyra looked down at the massive wolf and felt tears freeze on her cheeks. "Please don't die," she whispered. "Please, I can't watch someone else leave me behind." The storm raged on. The night stretched into eternity. Lyra huddled against the wolf's body, sharing what little warmth they both had, her hands still pressed against its wounds, refusing to give up. She didn't know why this mattered so much. She didn't know why she was risking her life for a stranger. She only knew that if she let this wolf die, she would lose something essential, some part of herself that had already been beaten down too many times. Dawn came slowly, the storm finally beginning to ease. Lyra was barely conscious, her body pushed past exhaustion into a numb, dreamlike state. She was dimly aware that she was hypothermic, that she needed to get warm soon or she would die. But the wolf was still breathing. That was what mattered. As weak sunlight finally penetrated the clouds, Lyra felt the wolf stir beneath her hands. She jerked back, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. Alone, exhausted, kneeling beside an alpha wolf that could kill her with one bite. The wolf's eyes opened. They were gold, pure, burning gold, and they fixed on Lyra with an intensity that stole her breath. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Lyra heard something that made her blood run cold. Footsteps. Dozens of them, coming fast through the snow. She scrambled to her feet, her frozen muscles screaming in protest, and looked toward the sound. Through the trees, she could see shapes moving, wolves, big ones, coming straight toward them. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the injured wolf, backing away. "I'm so sorry, I can't." But before she could run, the wolves burst into the clearing. They were massive, all of them, their fur ranging from silver to black, their eyes fixed on Lyra with predatory focus. She counted at least 20, all of them radiating the kind of power that made her Omega instinct scream at her to submit. The largest of them, a silver wolf with scars across his muzzle, stepped forward and shifted to human form. He was middle-aged, built like a warrior, and his eyes widened in shock as he saw the injured black wolf. "My king," he breathed. "King?" Lyra's mind reeled. This wasn't just an alpha. This was... The injured wolf began to shift. Bones cracked and reformed. Fur receded. Within moments, where the massive black wolf had lain, there was now a man. He was perhaps 30, with black hair and golden eyes that still held that same burning intensity. His body was covered in the same vicious wounds Lyra had spent the night treating, but he was alive, breathing, looking straight at her. "You," he said, his voice rough from pain and exhaustion. "You saved my life." Lyra couldn't speak, couldn't move. This close, she could feel his power radiating off him like heat from a forge. This wasn't just any alpha. This was Kyle Draven, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, the most powerful wolf in 1,000 miles, and she had just spent the night bleeding out her resources to keep him alive. Kale tried to sit up and immediately collapsed, his face twisting with pain. The silver-haired wolf shifted and rushed to his side. "My king, don't move. We need to get you back to the fortress. The healers—" "I'm fine, Marcus," Kale ground out. Then his eyes found Lyra again. "What's your name?" "Lyra," she stammered. "Lyra Vale." "Lyra Vale," Kale repeated slowly. Then, to her absolute shock, he bowed his head to her. "You have my gratitude. I was ambushed by rogues. If you hadn't found me—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Marcus, apparently Kale's second in command, was studying Lyra with sharp, suspicious eyes. How did a lone Omega come to be wandering in neutral territory during a blizzard? The question was polite, but Lyra heard the accusation beneath it. Lone Omegas didn't survive in the wilderness, especially not in winter. "I left my pack," Lyra said quietly. "Left? Or was exiled?" "Marcus," Kale's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "She saved my life. You will treat her with respect." Marcus bowed his head, properly chastised, but his eyes remained suspicious. Kale looked at Lyra again, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, then confusion, then something that looked almost like wonder. "Do you feel that?" he asked softly. Lyra frowned. "Feel what?" But even as she asked, she became aware of something strange. A warmth in her chest, right where the broken mate bond with Ronan had left a gaping wound. It was faint, barely there, but growing stronger with each passing second. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible." Oh, Kale's eyes widened. "A bond. A mate bond. It's forming." The silver-haired Marcus took a step back, his face pale. "My king, that's—" "I know what it is," Kale said, his voice rough with emotion Lyra couldn't identify. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he seemed uncertain. "You're my second-chance mate." Lyra felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Second-chance mates were rare, so rare that many wolves considered them a myth. The moon supposedly granted them only to wolves who had lost their first mate to death, or who had been deeply wronged by fate. But Lyra had rejected Ronan. She had walked away. Could this actually be real? "I don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "I was already rejected. I'm just an Omega. This doesn't make sense." Kale smiled, and despite his injuries, despite the blood and the exhaustion, it transformed his face. Neither does an Omega surviving alone in a blizzard to save a dying king, but here we are. He extended his hand toward her. "Come with us, Lyra Vale. Let me repay the debt I owe you, and perhaps we can figure out what fate is trying to tell us." Lyra stared at his hand. 3 days ago, she had been rejected and humiliated. She had walked into the wilderness expecting to die. She had been alone, broken, convinced of her own worthlessness. And now the most powerful alpha in the north was offering her his hand and calling her his mate. It felt like a dream, or a trap, or both. But as Lyra looked into Kale's golden eyes, she didn't see cruelty or contempt. She saw respect, gratitude, and something else, something that made her chest tighten with hope she was afraid to name. She took his hand. The bond flared to life between them, stronger than before, and Lyra gasped as warmth flooded through her, real warmth, not the artificial heat of a fire, but something deeper, something that chased away the cold and the loneliness and the pain of rejection. Kale's grip tightened on her hand. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything." Marcus cleared his throat. "My king, we need to move. You need a healer, and the rogues may still be in the area." Kale nodded and reluctantly released Lyra's hand. As his wolves moved to support him, he looked back at her one more time. "Stay close to me," he said. "You're under my protection now. No one will harm you." And as the king's guard surrounded them and they began the journey toward the northern fortress, Lyra realized that her story wasn't ending in the wilderness. It was just beginning. The northern fortress rose from the mountainside like a crown of stone and ice, its walls carved from the same dark granite that formed the peaks around it. Lyra had heard stories about this place. Whispers passed between lower-ranked wolves who would never be important enough to see it themselves. They said the fortress had stood for 500 years, built by the first Alpha King to unite the northern territories under one rule. They said its walls had never been breached, that its dungeons held prisoners who had challenged the king's authority and lost everything. Looking at it now, Lyra believed every word. The journey from the clearing had taken most of the day. Kyl's injuries had forced them to move slowly, and twice they'd had to stop so the king could rest. Each time, Marcus and the other guards had formed a protective circle around him, their eyes scanning the forest for threats. And each time, Lyra had found herself standing just outside that circle, uncertain of her place. She wasn't pack. She wasn't guard. She was just the Omega who had stumbled into something far bigger than herself. As they approached the massive iron gates, Lyra heard voices echoing from within, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The gates swung open, and suddenly they were surrounded by wolves in human form, all of them dressed in the dark leather and furs that marked the Northern Guard. They rushed forward, their faces etched with concern and relief. "The king returns! Someone fetch the healers! Who attacked you, my king?" Kale raised a hand, silencing the barrage of questions. "I'm fine," he said, though the blood soaking through his makeshift bandages suggested otherwise. "Marcus will brief the council on what happened. Right now I need—" He swayed on his feet, and 3 guards lunged forward to catch him before he fell. "Get him to the healing wing," Marcus barked. "Now!" As the guards carried Kale toward the fortress, Marcus turned to Lyra. Up close, in the fading light, she could see the sharp intelligence in his eyes, and the suspicion that hadn't faded since he'd first laid eyes on her. "You," he said, "follow me." It wasn't a request. Lyra followed Marcus through the gates and into the fortress proper. Inside, the place was a maze of stone corridors, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Wolves moved through the halls with purpose, some in armor, others in fine clothes that spoke of wealth and status. They all stopped to stare as Lyra passed. She knew what they saw, a small, bedraggled Omega in torn clothes, her hair matted with dried blood and snow, her skin pale from cold and exhaustion. She looked like something that had crawled out of the wilderness and didn't belong in a place of power. They weren't wrong. Marcus led her to a small room near the healing wing and gestured for her to enter. Inside there was a simple bed, a basin of water, and a change of clothes laid out on a wooden chair. "Clean yourself up," Marcus said. "Someone will bring you food. After that, you'll come with me to meet the council." "The council?" Lyra's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Why?" Marcus's expression was unreadable. "Because a lone Omega appeared in neutral territory during a blizzard, found our critically wounded king, and somehow formed a mate bond with him. The council will have questions, many questions." "I didn't plan any of this," Lyra said quickly. "I didn't even know who he was." "That's what you'll tell the council." Marcus's tone softened slightly. "Look, I understand this isn't your fault, but you have to understand our position. The king's life was threatened. We found him half dead with an unknown Omega who claims to have saved him. We need to be certain you're not part of a larger threat." Lyra felt her wolf bristle with indignation. "You think I attacked him? I spent the entire night keeping him alive." "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that rogues don't usually leave survivors. I think it's convenient that you appeared exactly when and where you did. And I think that mate bonds, even second chance bonds, can be faked by wolves with enough skill in dark magic." The accusation hit Lyra like a physical blow. I would never." "Then you have nothing to worry about." Marcus stepped back toward the door. "Clean up. Eat. The council will see you in 2 hours." He left, and Lyra heard the distinct sound of a lock clicking into place. She was a prisoner. Lyra sank onto the bed, her hands shaking. This was insane. She had saved Kyl's life, and now she was being treated like a criminal. Part of her wanted to scream, to pound on the door, and demand they let her go. But another part, the part that had survived 3 days alone in the wilderness, knew that screaming would accomplish nothing. She was in the heart of the most powerful pack in the north, surrounded by wolves who saw her as a threat. If she wanted to survive this, she needed to be smart. Lyra forced herself to stand and walk to the basin. The water was clean and blessedly warm, though it stung when it touched the cuts on her hands. She washed away the blood and dirt, wincing as she discovered new bruises she hadn't noticed before. When she was as clean as she could manage, she changed into the clothes that had been left for her, simple wool pants and a tunic that were too big, but infinitely better than her torn and frozen garments. A knock on the door made her jump. It opened to reveal a young woman carrying a tray of food. She couldn't have been more than 20, with auburn hair and bright green eyes that widened when she saw Lyra. "You're the one who saved the king," the woman breathed, setting the tray on the small table. "Everyone's talking about it. They're saying you kept him alive through the whole storm with nothing but your bare hands." Lyra blinked, surprised. I did what I could. Most wolves would have left him to die, especially an Omega." The woman's smile was genuine, without a trace of the condescension Lyra was used to. "I'm Nira. I work in the kitchens. If you need anything while you're here, just ask for me." "Thank you," Lyra said quietly, "but I don't think I'll be here long. The council wants to question me." Nira's expression turned serious. "I heard. Don't let them intimidate you. Most of them are good wolves, but they're protective of the king. His father was murdered by someone close to him, so they're suspicious of everyone." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. "Murdered?" 10 years ago, the old king was poisoned by his own beta, someone he trusted completely. Nira lowered her voice. "That's why King Kael is so careful about who he lets close to him, and why the council will want to make absolutely sure you're not a threat." After Nira left, Lyra forced herself to eat, though the food tasted like ash in her mouth. She understood their suspicion now. Kael's father had been betrayed by someone he trusted. Of course, they would be paranoid about a stranger appearing at exactly the right moment to save the current king's life. But understanding didn't make it any less terrifying. 2 hours later, Marcus returned to escort her to the council chamber. They walked through corridors that grew progressively more grand, the rough stone giving way to polished marble, the simple torches replaced by elaborate chandeliers. Lyra had never seen such wealth, such power, concentrated in one place. The council chamber was a massive circular room with a domed ceiling painted with stars. 12 chairs were arranged in a semicircle, and all but one were occupied by wolves who radiated authority. They ranged in age from perhaps 40 to well over 70, men and women both, and they all turned to look at Lyra as she entered. At the center of the semicircle sat Kael. He had been cleaned and bandaged, his wounds treated by healers far more skilled than Lyra. He wore fresh clothes, black leather and furs that marked his status, and his golden eyes tracked her movement across the room. Despite the healing, he still looked pale, and Lyra could see the tightness around his mouth that spoke of pain he was trying to hide. Their eyes met, and Lyra felt the mate bond pulse between them, stronger now, more insistent. It was like a thread connecting their hearts, vibrating with an emotion she couldn't name. "Lyra Vale," said an older woman with silver hair and sharp gray eyes. "I am Elena Frost, head of the King's Council. We have asked you here to answer questions about the events of yesterday. Will you cooperate?" "Yes," Lyra said, proud when her voice didn't shake. "Good." Elena folded her hands in her lap. "Let's begin with the simplest question. What were you doing in neutral territory during a blizzard?" Lyra took a breath. She had known this question was coming, but that didn't make it easier to answer. "I left my pack 3 days ago. I was traveling north looking for, I don't know, somewhere I could start over." "You left your pack voluntarily?" "Yes." "Why?" The room felt too small, too warm. Lyra was acutely aware of a dozen pairs of eyes on her, judging, evaluating. "My mate rejected me. I didn't want to stay somewhere I wasn't wanted." A murmur ran through the council. Elena's expression didn't change. "Who was your mate?" "Ronan Hale, Alpha of the Iron Ridge Pack." More murmurs. A man with a scarred face leaned forward. "I know Ronan. He's ambitious but not particularly strong. Why would he reject his fated mate?" Lyra felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Because I'm an Omega. He said he deserved a Luna who could stand beside him as an equal, not someone weak and worthless." The words tasted bitter even now. "And you accepted this rejection?" "What choice did I have?" Lyra's voice was sharper than she intended. "He's an Alpha. I'm an Omega. That's how it works, isn't it?" Elena's eyes narrowed. "Control your tone, girl. We are not your enemies. Aren't you? The words escaped before Lyra could stop them. You've locked me in a room. You're interrogating me like a criminal. All because I was stupid enough to save someone's life instead of minding my own business. Lyra. Kael's voice cut through the tension. It was the first time he'd spoken since she entered the room, and everyone turned to look at him. They're just trying to protect me. After what happened to my father, they have every reason to be cautious. Lyra met his eyes and saw understanding there, and something else. A warning, maybe, or a plea for patience. She took a breath and forced herself to calm down. I'm sorry. You're right. I'll answer your questions. Elena nodded, appeased. Tell us exactly what happened when you found the king. Lyra recounted the story, hearing the howl, making the decision to investigate, finding Kael dying in the snow. She described how she'd built the shelter, treated his wounds, stayed with him through the night. She left nothing out, including the parts where she'd talked to his unconscious form, confessing her own insecurities and fears. When she finished, the room was silent. Finally, an elderly man with kind eyes spoke. You risked your life to save a stranger. That speaks well of your character. Or it speaks to a well-rehearsed story, countered a woman with ice-blue eyes. Forgive me, but we've seen skilled manipulators before. The fact remains that this Omega appeared at exactly the right time and place to save our king's life. That's either an extraordinary coincidence or evidence of planning. What are you suggesting, Mira? Kael's voice had gone cold. That she orchestrated the rogue attack? That she somehow knew where I would be and when? I'm suggesting we investigate all possibilities, Mira said smoothly, including the possibility that the mate bond you claim to feel is artificial. There are wolves who specialize in such deceptions. It's real, Kael said flatly. I know what a mate bond feels like. With respect, my king, you've never had a mate before. How can you be certain? The question hung in the air like a blade. Kael stood, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his healing wounds. Because I can feel her emotions, her fear, her anger, her confusion about what's happening to her. Those aren't things that can be faked. He looked at Mira directly. And because when I woke up this morning, the first thing I felt was her presence. I knew where she was in the fortress without being told. That's not magic. That's a bond. Mira bowed her head but didn't look convinced. Elena cleared her throat. Regardless of the bond's authenticity, there remains the question of what to do with her. We cannot simply allow an unknown Omega to remain in the fortress without supervision. She saved my life, Kael said quietly. She will be treated as an honored guest, not a prisoner. And if she's a spy? The scarred man asked. If she reports our defenses, our numbers, our vulnerabilities to whoever sent her? No one sent me. Lyra's patience finally snapped. I don't care about your defenses or your politics. I just want to be left alone. If you're so worried I'm a threat, then let me go. I'll walk back out into the wilderness and you'll never see me again. You can't, Kael said. Lyra turned to him, shocked. What? You can't leave. Kael's expression was pained. The bond is forming, Lyra. If you leave now, it will cause both of us significant pain. And if the bond completes and then breaks... He trailed off, but the implication was clear. It could kill them both. Lyra felt the walls closing in. So I'm trapped here. You're safe here, Kael corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Lyra looked around the room at the council members who clearly didn't trust her. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I saved your life, and now I'm being punished for it. Before anyone could respond, the door to the council chamber burst open. A guard rushed in, his face pale. My king. The scouts have returned. The rogues who attacked you. They weren't acting alone. They were sent by someone inside the territory. The room exploded into chaos. Council members shouted questions, demanding details. Marcus was on his feet immediately, barking orders to secure the fortress, and Kael's eyes went to Lyra. In that moment, she saw his doubt. Just a flicker, barely there, but enough to break something inside her. He thought she might be involved. No, Lyra whispered. No, you can't think... Take her back to her room, Kael ordered, his voice hard. Postguards. No one comes in or out without my permission. Kael, please, do it. The command was laced with alpha power, and even Marcus flinched. Two guards grabbed Lyra's arms. She struggled, her Omega instinct screaming against being manhandled by unfamiliar alphas, but they were too strong. As they dragged her from the chamber, she locked eyes with Kael one last time. "I saved your life," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought that meant something." Then the doors slammed shut, and she was alone with the guards who thought she was a traitor. They locked her in a different room this time, smaller, with stone walls and no windows, a cell in everything but name. Lyra sank to the floor and wrapped her arms around her knees, trying to process what had just happened. She had left Iron Ridge to escape rejection and humiliation. Instead, she'd walked straight into something infinitely worse. She was trapped in a fortress full of wolves who thought she was a spy. The one person who might have believed in her, the king whose life she'd saved, now doubted her too. And the mate bond that was supposed to be a gift from fate felt more like a curse with every passing moment. Lyra closed her eyes and tried not to think about the fact that this room had a lock on the outside, but not the inside. She tried not to think about what would happen if they decided she really was a threat. She tried not to think about the look in Kael's eyes when he'd ordered her taken away. But most of all, she tried not to think about how familiar this felt, being rejected, being cast aside, being told she wasn't enough and never would be. Apparently, it didn't matter if you saved a king's life or not. If you were an Omega, you would always be expendable. Hours passed. No one came. No food, no water, no explanation. Lyra paced the small cell, her wolf restless and anxious. The bond in her chest ached, not with pain exactly, but with absence. Kael was somewhere in the fortress, probably meeting with his council, making decisions that would determine her fate, and she had no say in any of it. Finally, when the torchlight outside her door suggested it was deep into the night, Lyra heard footsteps approaching. She tensed, expecting guards or maybe Marcus with more accusations. Instead, the door opened to reveal Kael. He looked exhausted, his face drawn with pain and something else. Regret, maybe. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, and for a long moment, they just looked at each other. "I shouldn't have doubted you," Kael said finally. "The scouts found proof. The rogues were hired by a rival pack, one that's been trying to undermine my authority for years. You had nothing to do with it." Lyra didn't speak. She didn't trust herself to. "Marcus wants me to keep you confined until we can verify your story with Iron Ridge," Kael continued. "But I told him no. You're not a prisoner. You never were." He took a step closer. "I'm sorry, Lyra. I let my fear override my judgment. I know what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trust, and I let that cloud my perception of you." "You barely know me," Lyra said quietly. "How can you trust me?" "I know that you risked your life to save mine when you had every reason not to," Kael said. "I know that you stayed with me through a blizzard that should have killed you. I know that the bond between us is real, and that means something." He held out his hand. "I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove that not all alphas are like Ronin. That some of us recognize strength when we see it, even in an Omega." Lyra looked at his outstretched hand and felt something crack in her chest. The defensive wall she'd built around her heart since Ronin's rejection. Part of her wanted to refuse, to tell Kael exactly what he could do with his apology and his second chances. But another part, the part that had felt the bond pulse between them, that had seen genuine remorse in his eyes, wanted desperately to believe that maybe, just maybe, fate had given her this bond for a reason. She took his hand. The moment their skin touched, the bond flared to life, sending warmth cascading through her entire body. Kael's eyes widened, and she knew he felt it too, this connection that was growing stronger with every moment they spent together. "Come with me," Kael said softly. "There's something I need to show you." He led her through the fortress, moving quickly through corridors she hadn't seen before. They climbed a spiral staircase that seemed to go on forever, and finally emerged onto a balcony that overlooked the entire northern territory. The view stole Lyra's breath. Mountains stretched in every direction, their peaks crowned with snow that glittered under the moonlight. Forests spread like dark blankets between the peaks, and in the distance she could see the faint lights of smaller pack settlements. "This is what I protect," Kael said quietly. 50,000 wolves across 300 miles of the harshest territory in the north. Every one of them looks to me to keep them safe, to make the right decisions, to be strong even when I'm terrified. He turned to look at her. "I've been king for 10 years, and I've never let anyone see that fear. Not the council, Not Marcus. No one. Why are you telling me this? Lyra asked. Because you saw me at my weakest, Kael said. Bleeding out in the snow, helpless, dying. And you didn't see that as an opportunity to exploit. You saw someone who needed help, and you helped. He reached out and gently took her hand again. I think you're one of the strongest wolves I've ever met, Lyra Vale, and I hope you'll stay long enough to see if this bond between us is worth fighting for. Lyra felt tears prick her eyes. Everyone I've ever known has told me I'm weak. My pack, my alpha, even my friends who pitied me. Why should I believe you're any different? Because I've seen what you can do when you're fighting for something that matters, Kael said. You kept me alive when anyone else would have given up. That's not weakness. That's the kind of strength that holds kingdoms together. Before Lyra could respond, an alarm bell began to ring, loud and urgent, echoing across the fortress. Kael's expression changed instantly, all softness replaced by the hard authority of a king. That's the warning bell. We're under attack. He was already moving, pulling Lyra with him back toward the staircase. They ran down the steps, taking them two at a time, and burst back into the main corridor to find it filled with guards running toward the walls. Marcus appeared, his face grim. Rogues, my king, at least 100 of them, attacking the eastern gate. The eastern gate? Kael's eyes narrowed. That's our weakest point. Someone told them. We have a spy in the fortress, Marcus confirmed. It's the only explanation. Kael looked at Lyra, and she could see the calculation in his eyes, the doubt trying to creep back in. But then he shook his head as if physically dispelling the thought. Get her somewhere safe, he ordered Marcus. Then join me at the walls. No, Lyra said. Both men turned to stare at her. I'm not hiding while people fight for their lives. You're not a warrior, Kael said. This isn't your battle. Neither was saving your life, Lyra shot back, but I did it anyway. She met his eyes. I can help. I know I'm just an Omega, but I've survived things that would have killed other wolves. Let me prove that I'm not a liability. For a moment she thought he would refuse. Then Kael nodded. Stay close to Marcus. Do exactly what he says, and if things go wrong, they won't, Lyra interrupted. We're going to win. Kael's smile was fierce and proud. Yes, we are. As they raced toward the eastern wall, Lyra felt something shift inside her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running from a fight. She was running toward one. And this time, she wasn't going to back down. The eastern wall was chaos incarnate. Lyra had never seen battle before. Not real battle, where blood ran hot and wolves tore into each other with savage desperation. The Iron Ridge Pack had been peaceful during her time there. Their conflicts settled with posturing and dominance displays rather than violence. This was something else entirely. Rogues swarmed the base of the wall like ants, their howls splitting the night air. They were disorganized but numerous, throwing themselves at the fortress defenses with suicidal abandon. Above them, Kael's warriors fought to hold the line, raining down arrows and hurling spears into the mass of bodies below. They're trying to breach the gate, Marcus shouted over the din, his sword already drawn. If they get through, they'll flood the lower levels. Kael's face was carved from stone, his golden eyes tracking the battle with deadly precision. Despite his injuries, he moved like a predator, every motion controlled and purposeful. Reinforce the gate. Double the archers on the northern tower. I want crossfire on anyone who gets close. My king, you should be in the war room, not on the front lines, Marcus argued. You're still recovering. I'm exactly where I need to be. Kael's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. My wolves need to see me fighting beside them. Now, move! Marcus sprinted toward the northern tower, barking orders as he went. Kael turned to Lyra, and she saw something flash in his eyes. Concern, mixed with a respect that made her chest tighten. Can you handle a bow? He asked. Lyra shook her head. I've never been trained for combat. Omegas aren't allowed. I'm not asking what you were allowed to do in Iron Ridge, Kael interrupted. I'm asking what you can do now. The question hung between them, heavy with implication. What could she do? She was an Omega in the middle of a war zone, surrounded by trained warriors who had spent their lives preparing for moments like this. Logic said she should hide, stay out of the way, let the real fighters handle the threat. But Lyra had spent her entire life being told what she couldn't do, and she was done listening. I can help the wounded, she said. I kept you alive through a blizzard with almost nothing. I can do the same for your warriors." Kyle studied her for a heartbeat, then nodded sharply. "The healing wing is 3 levels down, eastern corridor. Tell the head healer that you have my authority to assist. Go. Now." Lyra ran. The fortress interior was barely more organized than the walls. Wounded warriors stumbled through the corridors, some supporting injured comrades, others clutching bleeding wounds. The air reeked of blood and fear and something else, something acrid that made Lyra's wolf recoil. Magic. Dark magic. She pushed the thought aside and focused on finding the healing wing, down 3 levels, eastern corridor. The stone stairs were slick with blood, and twice she had to press herself against the wall to let warriors pass. No one questioned her presence. In the chaos, one small Omega running through the halls was the least of anyone's concerns. The healing wing was pandemonium. The large chamber that served as the main treatment area was packed with injured wolves in various states of distress. Some lay on cots, their wounds being tended by healers who moved with practiced efficiency. Others sat against the walls, waiting their turn, their faces pale with blood loss and shock. At the center of it all was a woman who could only be the head healer, tall and commanding, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and hands that moved with surgical precision as she stitched a gaping wound in a warrior's shoulder. "You!" the woman barked without looking up. "If you're not bleeding out, make yourself useful. We need more bandages from the supply room, 3rd door on the left." "The king sent me to help," Lyra said quickly. "I'm Lyra Vale. He said I have his authority to assist." The healer's hands never stopped moving, but her eyes flicked up to assess Lyra in a single, devastating glance. "You're the Omega who saved his life in the storm." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Can you set a broken bone?" I think so. I've never—" "Then you're about to learn." The healer jerked her chin toward a young warrior slumped against the far wall, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. "Caden. Broken radius in ulna. Set it, splint it, move on to the next one. If you don't know what you're doing, ask. If you freeze up, get out of my way. Clear?" "Clear," Lyra said, her heart hammering. She crossed to Caden and knelt beside him. Up close, she could see he was barely older than she was, his face twisted with pain he was trying desperately to hide. The break was obvious, a compound fracture with bone pressing against the skin, though thankfully not piercing through. "I'm going to set this," Lyra told him, forcing her voice to stay calm. "It's going to hurt." "Just do it," Caden ground out through clenched teeth. Lyra had seen her father set a broken leg once, years ago, when one of the pack's hunters had fallen from a tree. She tried to recall the steps, align the bone, apply steady pressure, immobilize the limb. Her hands shook as she gripped Caden's arm. "On 3, she said. 1, 2. She pulled on 2, the way her father had done, using the element of surprise to get through the worst of it before the patient could tense up. Caden screamed, his good hand slamming against the stone floor, but the bone shifted back into alignment with a sickening crunch. Lyra's stomach churned, but she didn't stop. She grabbed wooden splints from a nearby supply crate and wrapped them around Caden's arm, binding them tight with strips of clean cloth. Her hands moved faster than her thoughts, driven by pure instinct and the desperate need to help. "Done," she whispered. Caden's face was gray, slick with sweat, but he managed a weak nod. "Thank you." There was no time to acknowledge the gratitude. Already the head healer was pointing to another patient, then another. Lyra moved through the healing wing like a woman possessed, setting bones, cleaning wounds, applying pressure to bleeding injuries. She'd never been trained for this. Omegas weren't taught healing beyond basic first aid, but she learned fast, watching the other healers, asking quick questions, adapting on the fly. Somewhere in the controlled chaos, she lost track of time. Minutes blurred into hours. The wounded kept coming, an endless stream of broken bodies that needed tending. Lyra's hands became covered in blood that wasn't hers. Her muscles screamed with exhaustion. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. These wolves were fighting to protect their home, and she was going to make damn sure as many of them survived as possible. A massive explosion rocked the fortress, sending dust raining from the ceiling. Lyra stumbled, catching herself on a cot. Around her, the healers froze, their faces turned toward the sound. They've breached the outer gate, someone whispered. The head healer's jaw tightened. Then we prepare for the worst. Everyone who can still fight, grab a weapon. The rest of you keep working. They'll have to go through us to reach these wounded. Lyra felt ice slide down her spine. The rogues were inside the fortress. Another explosion, closer this time. The torches flickered, and several went out completely, plunging sections of the healing wing into shadow. Lyra heard shouting from the corridors beyond, battle cries mixing with screams of pain and rage. The fighting was coming to them. The head healer pressed a knife into Lyra's hand. Nothing fancy, just a simple blade meant for cutting bandages, but sharp enough to serve as a weapon if needed. Stay close to the wounded. If rogues make it this far, protect the ones who can't protect themselves. Lyra's fingers closed around the knife handle. It felt pathetically small, inadequate for what might be coming, but it was better than nothing. The doors to the healing wing burst open. Lyra spun, knife raised, her heart in her throat. But it wasn't rogues. It was Marcus, his armor splattered with blood, his expression grim as death. We're holding them at the second courtyard, but they're using some kind of explosive magic, he reported to the head healer. Kael thinks they have a mage with them, maybe more than one. We've never seen rogues with this kind of coordination or resources. Where's the king? The head healer demanded. Leading the counterattack. Marcus's eyes swept the room and landed on Lyra. You. The king wants you moved to the safe room. Now. I'm not leaving the wounded, Lyra said automatically. That wasn't a request. Then it's a good thing I'm not taking orders from you. Lyra turned back to the patient she'd been treating, a female warrior with deep claw marks across her abdomen. The king put me here to help. That's what I'm doing. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but another explosion, much closer now, made the decision for him. Fine. But if the rogues break through, you run. Understand? Before Lyra could answer, the doors exploded inward in a shower of splinters and stone. Rogues poured into the healing wing like a flood of teeth and claws. There were at least a dozen of them, their eyes wild with bloodlust, their fur matted with gore. They shifted between wolf and human form with practiced ease, using whatever shape gave them the advantage in the moment. The healers who could fight surged forward to meet them. Marcus was a whirlwind of violence, his sword cutting through the attackers with brutal efficiency. But there were too many rogues, and they were too spread out, targeting the wounded who couldn't defend themselves. Lyra saw a rogue lunge toward Caden, the young warrior whose arm she'd set, who was still too weak to shift, let alone fight. She didn't think, she just moved. The knife in her hand found the rogue's throat before she even registered what she was doing. Hot blood sprayed across her face and chest. The rogue collapsed, choking, and Lyra stumbled back, horrified by what she'd done. She'd killed someone. There was no time to process it. Another rogue was coming at her, this one in wolf form, its jaws open wide. Lyra dove to the side, feeling teeth snap shut inches from her shoulder. She rolled, came up with the knife still clutched in her trembling hand, and slashed wildly. The blade caught the wolf across the muzzle. It yelped and retreated, blood dripping from the shallow wound. "Behind you!" Caden shouted. Lyra spun. A massive male rogue in human form was reaching for her, his hands like claws, his face twisted with savage glee. She tried to bring the knife up, but he was too fast. His hand closed around her throat, lifting her off her feet. "Little Omega," the rogue hissed, his breath reeking of death. "The king's new pet. Our employer will pay extra for you." Employer? Lyra's vision was starting to blur, black spots dancing at the edges. She kicked uselessly at the rogue's torso, her lungs screaming for air. The knife fell from her nerveless fingers. This was it. She was going to die in a healing wing, surrounded by people she'd been trying to save, killed by rogues who saw her as nothing more than a bargaining chip. Then something hit the rogue like a freight train. Lyra crashed to the floor, gasping and choking. Through watering eyes, she saw a black wolf, massive and terrifying, tearing into her attacker with lethal precision. It took her a moment to recognize the golden eyes. Kael. The fight was over in seconds. The rogue didn't stand a chance. Kael's jaws closed around the male's throat and crushed it, ending the threat permanently. Then he shifted back to human form, ignoring his own nakedness, and dropped to his knees beside Lyra. "Are you hurt?" His hands were gentle despite the violence they'd just inflicted, checking her throat where the rogue had gripped her. I'm fine, Lyra rasped. The wounded are being protected. Kyle helped her to her feet, his eyes searching hers. You should have gone to the safe room. People needed help. You could have been killed. So could you. Lyra met his gaze steadily. But we're both still here. Something shifted in Kyle's expression, pride mixed with exasperation, mixed with something deeper that made the mate bond pulse between them like a living thing. You're either the bravest wolf I've ever met or the most stubborn. Can't I be both? Despite everything, the blood, the bodies, the ongoing battle, Kale smiled. Yes, you definitely can. Marcus appeared slightly out of breath but alive. The rogues are retreating. We're pushing them back toward the outer walls. How many did we lose? Kyle asked, his smile fading. 15 confirmed dead, twice that many wounded. Marcus's expression was grim. But it could have been worse. Much worse. Kale nodded, then looked around the healing wing. The floor was littered with dead rogues and broken furniture. Several of the wounded had been killed in the attack, their bodies covered with blood-soaked sheets. The healers who survived were already back at work, tending to fresh injuries, their faces set in masks of professional calm that didn't quite hide their trauma. Find out who hired these rogues, Kyle ordered. I want names. I want to know who has the resources to arm them with explosive magic and coordinate an attack this sophisticated. Already on it, Marcus said. We captured 3 alive. They're being questioned now. Good. I want answers by dawn. Kale turned to the head healer who was directing the cleanup efforts. Elena, what do you need? The healer, Elena, apparently, barely looked up from the wound she was stitching. More hands, more supplies, and about 12 hours of uninterrupted peace. Since I'm unlikely to get any of those, I'll settle for reinforced doors and guards posted at every entrance. Done. Kyle looked back at Lyra. Come with me. We need to talk. It wasn't a request, but his tone was gentle, almost pleading. Lyra followed him out of the healing wing, acutely aware of the blood drying on her skin and clothes, the knife she'd used to kill still lying somewhere on the floor behind her. Kale led her up several flights of stairs, away from the sounds of cleanup and mourning, until they reached a private chamber she hadn't seen before. Inside was a small sitting room with a fireplace and comfortable chairs that looked hand-carved from dark wood. Through an open doorway she could see a bedroom beyond. These were the king's private quarters. Kyle closed the door behind them and finally seemed to notice his own nudity. He grabbed a robe from a hook on the wall and shrugged it on, tying it loosely at the waist. The casual domesticity of the gesture was jarring after the violence they'd just survived. Sit, he said, gesturing to one of the chairs. Please. Lyra sat. Her legs were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off, and she wasn't entirely sure they would support her weight much longer. Kale poured water from a pitcher on a side table and handed her a cup. She drank gratefully, the cool liquid soothing her bruised throat. He poured a second cup for himself and sat in the chair opposite her, close enough that their knees almost touched. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. You killed tonight, Kyle said finally, probably for the first time. Lyra nodded, not trusting her voice. How do you feel? The question surprised her. She'd expected judgment or analysis, not genuine concern about her emotional state. I don't know, she admitted. Numb, mostly, like it happened to someone else. That's normal. The real feelings will come later, probably when you least expect them. Kale leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You saved lives tonight, Lyra. The healers told me what you did, setting bones, treating wounds, fighting off rogues to protect the injured. You performed like a trained warrior, not an Omega who'd never seen battle. I just did what needed to be done. Exactly. Kyle's eyes held hers. That's what makes you extraordinary. Not your rank, not your designation. Your willingness to do what needs to be done, even when it terrifies you. Lyra felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. Not now. Not in front of him. The rogue who attacked me, she said, changing the subject. He said something about an employer. He said someone would pay extra for me. Kyle's expression darkened. I heard. We're interrogating the prisoners now to find out who's behind this. But why would anyone want me? I'm nobody. I've been here less than a day. You're my mate, Kyle said quietly. Or you will be if the bond completes. That makes you extremely valuable to anyone who wants leverage over me. The implication hit Lyra like a physical blow. She'd made Kyle vulnerable just by existing in his life. The rogues had attacked not just to weaken the fortress, but to capture her specifically. "This is my fault," she whispered. "No." Kyle's hand covered hers, warm and solid. "This is the fault of whoever hired those rogues. You're not responsible for other people's evil. If I left, you're not leaving." There was steel in his voice now. "We've already discussed this. The bond is forming. Breaking it now would hurt both of us, possibly kill us. And even if that weren't true, I wouldn't let you go." "Why?" The question burst out of Lyra before she could stop it. "Why do you even care? You barely know me. The bond could be a mistake, some cosmic accident. I'm just an Omega who happened to be in the right place at the right time." Kale was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes studying her face like he was memorizing every detail. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but absolute. "Do you know what I thought about when I was dying in that storm? Right before I lost consciousness, when I was certain I'd never wake up again?" Lyra shook her head. "I thought about how empty my life had been. I'm 30 years old, and I've spent every single day of the last decade being the perfect king. Strong, decisive, untouchable. I have 50,000 wolves who respect me, a council that trusts my judgment, and territory that spans hundreds of miles. But I don't have anyone who sees me as just Kyle. The man, not the king." He squeezed her hand gently. "Then I woke up in a makeshift shelter to find a stranger keeping me alive through sheer force of will. A stranger who talked to my unconscious body about her own pain and loneliness, who confessed that she felt worthless but refused to let me die anyway. And I realized that this Omega I'd never met had more courage in her little finger than most alphas I know. Kale, I'm not asking you to love me, Lyra. I know that's not something that can be forced or rushed, but I'm asking you to stay. Give the bond a chance. Give us a chance, and maybe, just maybe, we can both find something we didn't even know we were looking for." Lyra's throat was tight with emotion. She wanted to say yes. Part of her was screaming to say yes, to fall into this impossible dream where she mattered to someone powerful and kind. But another part, the part that had been broken by Ronan's rejection, was terrified. Before she could answer, a sharp knock interrupted them. Marcus's voice came through the door, urgent and strained. "My king, we have a problem. A big one." Kale's jaw tightened, but he called out, "Come in!" Marcus entered, his face grim. Behind him were two guards dragging a prisoner, one of the captured rogues, his face bloody and his eyes wild with fear. "Tell him what you told me," Marcus ordered the prisoner. The rogue swallowed hard, his eyes darting between Kyle and Lyra. "The attack was a diversion. While you were fighting us at the eastern gate, someone else entered through the tunnels beneath the fortress. Someone important." "Who?" Kyle's voice could have frozen fire. "I don't know his name, but he's not here to kill you." The rogue's eyes locked on Lyra, and she felt ice slide through her veins. "He's here for her, and he has magic, the kind that can break mate bonds or forge new ones, the kind that costs a fortune and leaves no traces." Lyra's mind reeled. Someone was in the fortress right now, hunting her specifically, armed with magic powerful enough to manipulate the sacred bonds that connected souls. Where? Kale was already on his feet, his alpha power filling the room like pressure before a storm. "Where in the fortress?" "I don't—" Marcus's hand closed around the rogue's throat. "Where?" The lower archives," the rogue choked out. "He's searching for something. Documents, records. I don't know what." Kyle and Marcus exchanged a look that communicated volumes without words. "The bloodline records," Marcus said quietly. "No." Kale's face had gone pale. "If he accesses those—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Lyra could see the fear in his eyes, real, genuine fear that she suspected few people had ever witnessed. "Get every available warrior to the lower archives," Kyle ordered. "Now, I want that intruder found and captured alive. I want to know who sent him and what he was looking for." Marcus nodded and left at a run, taking the prisoner and guards with him. Kale turned to Lyra, his expression torn. "I need you to go to the safe room. I know you don't want to hide, but this is different. If someone is using magic to target you specifically, what are bloodline records? Lyra interrupted. Kael hesitated, and she saw the moment he decided to trust her with the truth. Complete genealogies of every major pack in the Northern Territories going back 500 years. Lineages, matings, births, deaths, everything. If someone has access to those records, they can identify power concentrations, find weaknesses, even locate wolves with rare bloodlines that make them valuable for... He trailed off. For what? For breeding, Kael said bluntly. Or for sacrifice in blood magic rituals. Or for leverage against their families. The records are supposed to be kept secret for exactly this reason. Lyra's blood ran cold. You think someone wants to know about my bloodline? I think someone wants to verify that you are who you claim to be. A random Omega from Iron Ridge with no special significance. Kael's eyes were haunted. Or discover that you're something else entirely. But I'm not, I'm just... She stopped, because suddenly pieces were clicking together in her mind. Her parents had died when she was young. Her father in a hunting accident, her mother from illness. She'd been raised by the pack collectively, shuffled between foster families who saw her as an obligation more than a blessing. She'd never questioned her origins because Omegas didn't ask questions. But what if there was more to her story than she'd been told? We need to get to the archives, Lyra said. If someone is looking into my history, I have a right to know what they find. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. This is my life we're talking about. Lyra stood, her hands clenched into fists. My past, my bloodline, whatever secrets someone thinks are worth attacking your fortress for. I'm not going to hide while other people fight over information about me. Kael looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the internal war playing out behind his eyes. The king who needed to keep her safe. The mate who understood her need to know the truth. The man who respected her right to make her own choices. If you come with me, he said finally, you stay behind me at all times. You don't engage in combat. And if I tell you to run, you run. Agreed? Agreed, Lyra said without hesitation. They ran through the fortress corridors, Kael's guards falling into formation around them. The lower archives were deep beneath the main structure, accessible only through a series of winding staircases that descended into the mountain itself. The air grew colder as they went down, the torchlight flickering against damp stone walls. Lyra could feel the mate bond thrumming between them, stronger now, more insistent. It pulled her toward Kael like a physical force, making it difficult to maintain the distance he'd insisted on. She wondered if he felt it too, this overwhelming need to be closer, to touch, to confirm that they were both still alive and whole. They reached the archive entrance to find the heavy oak door blown off its hinges, splinters scattered across the floor like broken bones. Beyond, Lyra could see rows of ancient shelving filled with leather-bound books and scrolls, illuminated by an eerie green light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Magic. Active magic. Kael shifted to wolf form instantly, his black fur bristling, his lips pulled back in a silent snarl. The guards did the same, creating a wall of muscle and teeth between Lyra and whatever waited in the archives. They moved forward as a unit, silent except for the click of claws on stone. The green light grew brighter, and Lyra heard a voice, male, cultured, speaking words in a language she didn't recognize. They rounded a corner and found him. The intruder was older, perhaps 50, with silver hair and robes marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. He stood before a massive tome laid open on a stone pedestal, his hands moving in intricate patterns as he chanted. The green light emanated from the book itself, casting his face in sickly illumination. He looked up as they entered, and his expression shifted from concentration to triumph. Kael Draven, he said pleasantly, as if they'd met at a social gathering rather than an illegal break-in. How kind of you to join me, and you brought the girl. Perfect. Kael shifted back to human form, a deliberate show of confidence, facing the threat without the protection of his wolf. Who are you? I think you know. The mage's smile was cold. Or you would, if you'd studied your father's death more carefully. I was there, you see, in the shadows, where power always hides. Lyra saw Kael's body go rigid with barely contained rage. You helped murder my father. Helped? My dear boy, I orchestrated it. Your father's beta was merely the weapon I wielded. Rather crude, I admit, but effective. The mage's eyes slid to Lyra. Just as I'm orchestrating events now, tell me, little Omega, do you know what you really are? Don't answer him, Kael ordered. She doesn't know. The mage laughed. Oh, this is delicious. They hid you so well, child. Changed your name, buried your records, convinced you that you were nothing more than a weak Omega who deserved to be rejected. What are you talking about? Lyra demanded, stepping forward despite Kael's warning growl. The mage gestured to the book. These records tell a fascinating story. About a bloodline that was supposed to be extinct, about a child who survived when her entire pack was slaughtered, about an Omega who carries the genes of the most powerful wolf line in history, the Shadowborn. The word hit Lyra like a shockwave. Shadowborn. She'd heard the name in stories, legends whispered around campfires. They were the first wolves, the ones who had walked between worlds, commanded magic, shaped reality itself. They'd been hunted to extinction 300 years ago by terrified packs who feared their power. That's impossible, Kael said. The Shadowborn are gone. All but one bloodline. Hidden, diluted through generations of careful breeding with ordinary wolves, but still there, still viable. The mage's eyes gleamed. And now she's formed a mate bond with you, the Alpha King. Do you have any idea what kind of power your children would possess? What someone could do with access to that bloodline? Lyra felt like the ground was dropping away beneath her feet. This couldn't be real. She was nobody. She was just an Omega from Iron Ridge. But deep inside, her wolf stirred, and for the first time, Lyra felt it differently. Not weak, not small. Something vast and ancient, coiled tight, waiting. You're lying, she whispered. Am I? The mage pulled something from his robes, a vial of dark liquid. This is blood taken from your mother before she died. It's been preserved with magic for 22 years, waiting for the right moment. I've just verified it against the Shadowborn records. You are Lyra Shadowborn, last daughter of the extinct bloodline, and you belong to whoever can control you. He threw the vial at the ground. It shattered, and black smoke erupted from the liquid, taking form, shapes that moved like wolves but weren't. Creatures of shadow and nightmare that launched themselves at Kael's guards. Chaos erupted. The guards shifted and fought, but these weren't normal enemies. The shadow creatures were made of magic, and teeth and claws passed through them harmlessly. They needed a different kind of weapon. The mage was moving toward Lyra, his hands raised, his lips forming words that made her bones vibrate with wrongness. She stumbled back, but there was nowhere to go. The shelves boxed her in. Kael threw himself between them, his power radiating outward in a wave that knocked the mage off balance. But the magic was too strong. The shadow creatures were overwhelming the guards. They were going to lose. Lyra felt something building inside her, heat and pressure, like a dam about to break. The bond with Kael was screaming, demanding she do something, be something more than what she'd always believed. Stop fighting it, the mage called over the chaos. The Shadowborn power is awakening whether you want it to or not. Let me teach you to control it. Let me show you what you could become. She's not going anywhere with you, Kael roared. The mage smiled. Then she'll destroy you all when the power breaks free uncontrolled. Is that what you want, little Omega? To kill your mate the moment you discover your true strength? Lyra looked at Kael, bleeding, fighting, defending her, even though he'd just learned she was something dangerous and unknown. She looked at the guards dying to protect her. She looked at the shadow creatures that would slaughter them all if she didn't act. The heat inside her built to a crescendo. She could feel it now, the power the mage had spoken of, vast and terrifying and absolutely real. Lyra, don't, Kael started. She let the dam break. Power exploded out of her in a shockwave of silver light that filled the archives. The shadow creatures shrieked and dissolved. The mage was thrown backward, slamming into the stone wall with bone-crushing force. The ancient book on the pedestal burst into flames, and Lyra stood at the center of it all, her eyes blazing silver, her body outlined in light that didn't come from any torch. For one perfect moment, she was the most powerful being in the room. Then the light faded, and Lyra collapsed. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Kael's face, his eyes wide with shock and fear, and something that might have been wonder. The last thing she heard was the mage laughing, broken, bloody, but triumphant. "The Shadowborn awakens," he gasped, "and the whole north will burn." Lyra woke to silence, not the comfortable silence of sleep, but the oppressive quiet of a room where people were afraid to speak. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing on an unfamiliar ceiling, carved stone with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the firelight. Her body felt heavy, disconnected, like she was wearing someone else's skin. "She's awake." The voice was Marcus's, tight with tension. Lyra turned her head. Even that small movement took effort, and found herself in a large chamber she didn't recognize. A dozen faces stared back at her, some familiar, most not. They stood in a loose semicircle around the bed where she lay, and every single one of them looked at her with the same expression. Fear. Kale sat in a chair beside the bed, close enough to touch, but carefully not touching. His face was haggard, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, and when their gazes met, something complicated flickered across his features. Relief, concern, and underneath it all, wariness. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. Lyra tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her skull and the room spun violently. Kale's hand shot out to steady her, but he pulled back at the last second, as if remembering himself, as if remembering what she was. "What happened?" Lyra's voice came out rough, scratchy. "The mage." "In the dungeons," Marcus said. "What's left of him. You broke half the bones in his body with that blast." The memories came flooding back. The archives. The revelation about her bloodline. The power that had erupted from her like a tidal wave, destroying everything in its path. "Did I hurt anyone?" The question came out small, terrified of the answer. "2 guards have broken ribs. 1 has a concussion." Kael's tone was carefully neutral. "They'll recover. The shadow creatures were destroyed completely. The ancient records." He paused. "Most of them are ash now." Lyra's stomach dropped. She'd destroyed irreplaceable historical documents. She'd injured Kael's own guards. She'd lost control of something she didn't even know existed inside her, and people had paid the price. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know." "We know." Kael's voice softened slightly. "You were defending yourself. Defending all of us. If you hadn't acted, that mage would have either killed us or taken you. The council understands that." But Lyra saw the way the others were looking at her, the council members who had crowded into this room, keeping their distance, watching her like she was a bomb that might explode again at any moment. Understanding was not the same as trust. Elena Frost stepped forward, her gray eyes sharp and assessing. "Can you control it? The power?" "I don't know." Lyra forced herself to meet the older woman's gaze. "I didn't even know I had it until a few hours ago. How am I supposed to control something I don't understand?" "That's the problem," said Mira, the council member who had questioned Lyra's mate bond before. "You're carrying the bloodline of the Shadowborn, wolves who were hunted to extinction because their power was too dangerous, too unpredictable. And now you're here, bonded to our king, with abilities that could level this entire fortress if you lose control again." "I won't." "You can't promise that," Mira interrupted. "None of us can. The Shadowborn were killed for a reason. They couldn't be trusted with the power they wielded." "That's enough." Kale's voice carried the weight of command. "Lyra is not responsible for the actions of wolves who died 300 years ago. She didn't choose this bloodline any more than she chose to be Omega." "But she is both," Elena said quietly. "An Omega with the power of an Alpha. No, more than an Alpha. The historical records that survived describe Shadowborn who could bend reality itself, who could kill with a thought, who drove entire packs mad with nightmares. If even a fraction of those abilities manifest in her—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Lyra felt something crack inside her chest. She'd spent her entire life being told she was too weak, too powerless, too insignificant to matter. Now she was being told she was too strong, too dangerous, too much. There was no winning. No matter what she was, it would never be right. "What do you want from me?" The words came out harder than she intended. "Should I leave? Go back to the wilderness and hope the power kills me before I hurt anyone else? Would that make you feel safer?" The room fell silent. Several council members exchanged uncomfortable glances. "No one is suggesting you leave," Kael said firmly. Though Lyra noticed, he didn't look at Mira when he said it. We're trying to figure out the best way forward, for everyone. The best way forward is to teach her control, said a new voice. Everyone turned. An elderly man had entered the room so quietly that no one had noticed. He was ancient, possibly the oldest wolf Lyra had ever seen, with white hair that fell past his shoulders and eyes that were milky with cataracts but somehow still penetrating. He leaned heavily on a gnarled walking stick, but there was power in him that made the air itself feel heavier. Master Aldrich, Kael said, standing immediately and offering a small bow of respect. I didn't expect you to come. I felt the awakening, Aldrich said, his voice surprisingly strong for someone so frail-looking. A Shadowborn power signature hasn't been felt in these mountains for 3 centuries. Of course I came. His clouded eyes fixed on Lyra with unnerving accuracy. So, the last daughter lives. You knew? Lyra asked. I suspected. When the king described finding you in that storm, saving his life with nothing but determination and scraps of cloth, I wondered. Shadowborn have always been survivors. Aldrich moved closer, studying her with an intensity that made Lyra want to squirm. Your mother was careful. She hid you well, raised you as an Omega to keep you beneath notice. It probably saved your life. My mother is dead, Lyra said flatly. Yes, killed by wolves who discovered what she was and wanted to use her bloodline for their own purposes. She died protecting the secret of your existence. Aldrich's expression softened slightly. She would be proud of what you've become. Weak enough to be overlooked, strong enough to survive when it mattered. The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. Her mother, the woman she barely remembered, had died to protect her, had spent years pretending to be something she wasn't, had taught Lyra to be small and quiet and invisible, all to keep her safe. And Lyra had spent those same years hating herself for being exactly what her mother had needed her to be. Can you teach me? Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. To control it? Aldrich was quiet for a long moment. I can teach you what I know, but understand this, child. Shadowborn power is not like normal wolf abilities. It doesn't follow the same rules. It responds to emotion, to need, to the deepest parts of who you are. Controlling it means controlling yourself in ways that most wolves never have to. I'll do whatever it takes. Even if it means facing parts of yourself you'd rather keep buried? Even if the training breaks you down before it builds you back up? Aldrich's milky eyes seemed to see straight through her. This will not be easy, Lyra Shadowborn. It will hurt. You will fail, and there's no guarantee you'll survive the process. Lyra thought about the Omega she'd been 4 days ago, rejected, humiliated, convinced of her own worthlessness. She thought about the woman she'd become in the wilderness, a survivor who had kept a dying king alive through sheer stubborn will. She thought about the power that had erupted from her in the archives, terrible and beautiful and absolutely her own. I'm not afraid of hard work, she said, and I'm tired of running from who I am. Aldrich smiled, and it transformed his ancient face. Good. We start at dawn. The council erupted into protests. Training a Shadowborn was dangerous. They should consult with other territories. They needed more time to assess the risks. But Kael silenced them with a single raised hand. Master Aldrich is the foremost expert on ancient wolf magic in the Northern Territories. If he believes Lyra can be trained, then that's what will happen. His golden eyes swept the room, daring anyone to challenge him. Unless someone wants to explain to me why we should leave a Shadowborn untrained with powers she can't control, in a fortress full of people she could accidentally kill. No one spoke. I thought not. Kael turned to Aldrich. You'll have whatever resources you need. Guards, supplies, a secure training ground, anything. I'll need privacy more than anything else, Aldrich said. The old meditation caves in the northern peaks should suffice, and the girl will need to be isolated from the pack bond energies while she learns. Too much emotional interference will make it harder for her to separate her own power from external influences. Lyra's heart sank. Isolation. Again. Just when she'd started to feel like she might belong somewhere. As if sensing her thoughts, Kael's hand found hers under the cover of the blanket. The touch was brief, hidden from the council's view, but it sent warmth flooding through the mate bond. You're not alone, the gesture said. I'm here. Lyra squeezed back, grateful beyond words. The council filed out slowly, still muttering among themselves, still casting wary glances at Lyra. Only Marcus lingered, his expression troubled. "My king, may I speak freely?" "Always." Marcus glanced at Lyra, then seemed to decide she had a right to hear whatever he was going to say. "The mage we captured, he's not talking. We've tried everything short of torture, and he just laughs. But before the guards moved him to the dungeons, he said something strange." "What?" Kale's body had gone tense. He said, "The awakening was just the beginning. They're coming for what's theirs." Marcus's jaw was tight. "I think he's part of something bigger. An organization, maybe, or a conspiracy. And I think they see Lyra's bloodline as property they intend to claim." Lyra felt ice slide through her veins. "Who's coming?" "That's what we need to find out." Kale stood, his face set in grim lines. "Double the fortress guards. I want scouts on every approach route. And get our intelligence network to start asking questions, quietly, about anyone who's been researching Shadowborn history in the last decade." "Already done," Marcus said. "But Kyle, if there's a group out there powerful enough to hire a mage of that caliber, coordinate a rogue attack as a distraction, and infiltrate our fortress, we're dealing with enemies who have resources we can't match. Then we'll get creative." Kyle's smile was sharp and dangerous. "We have something they don't, a Shadowborn who's about to learn how to use her power. Let them come. We'll be ready." After Marcus left, Kyle sank back into the chair beside Lyra's bed. The exhaustion that he'd been hiding from his council was written plainly across his face now that they were alone. "You should rest," Lyra said quietly. "So should you. You've been unconscious for 6 hours." 6 hours? Lyra's eyes widened. "I thought it felt like minutes." "That's what happens when you channel that much power. Your body shuts down to recover." Kale rubbed his face with both hands. "You scared me, Lyra. When you collapsed, I thought—" He stopped, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Lyra reached out and took his hand properly this time, no longer hiding the contact. His fingers closed around hers immediately, holding tight. "I'm sorry," she said, "for all of this. For being complicated. For bringing danger to your doorstep. For—" "Stop." Kale's voice was firm but gentle. "You saved my life in that storm. You fought beside my healers during the attack. You stopped that mage from stealing information that could have destroyed half the packs in the north. You have nothing to apologize for." "I destroyed your archives." "Books can be replaced. You can't." Kale shifted closer until his forehead was nearly touching hers. "Do you know what I thought when that power exploded out of you? After the shock? After the fear?" Lyra shook her head. "I thought, she's magnificent." His smile was small but genuine. "You were terrifying and beautiful and absolutely unstoppable. And I realized that this is who you really are. Not the Omega who was taught to be small. Not the rejected mate who believed she was worthless. This fierce, powerful woman who will burn down the world to protect the people she cares about." Tears pricked Lyra's eyes. "I don't feel powerful. I feel like I'm drowning." "Then let me help you swim." Kale's free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb gently brushing away a tear that had escaped. "We'll figure this out together. The training, the threats, all of it. You're not alone anymore, Lyra. You have me. You have this pack. And whether you believe it or not, you have the strength to become exactly who you're meant to be." The mate bond pulsed between them, stronger than ever, a living connection that Lyra could feel with every heartbeat. It was terrifying and comforting in equal measure, this tie to another soul, this vulnerability that came with letting someone see all of you. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I can't control it? What if I hurt people I care about?" "Then we'll deal with it, together." Kale's voice was absolute certainty. "But I don't think you will. You've been controlling yourself your entire life, controlling your Omega instincts, your emotions, your reactions to people who treated you like you were nothing. This is just a different kind of control. This could kill people. So could 1,000 other things. Life is risk, Lyra. The question is whether the risk is worth taking." His golden eyes held hers. "And you are absolutely worth it." Before Lyra could respond, Aldrich returned, moving with surprising speed for someone so old. "Enough romantic declarations. he said briskly. The girl needs food, water, and 8 hours of real sleep before we begin training. And you, King, need to attend to your territory before your council decides you've been compromised by mate bonds and pretty eyes. Kale stood reluctantly. She stays here, in my personal quarters. I want guards posted at every entrance. Afraid someone will steal her away in the night? Aldrich's tone was amused. Yes, Kyle said flatly. We've already had one infiltration. I'm not taking chances with her safety. Fair enough. Aldrich turned to Lyra. Eat, sleep. Don't try to access your power. Any experimentation before proper training could be catastrophic for you and everyone around you. After they left, servants brought food, real food, not the scraps Lyra was used to from her Omega days. Roasted meat, fresh bread, vegetables and butter, fruit that must have cost a fortune this late in the season. She ate mechanically, barely tasting it, her mind churning through everything that had happened. She was Shadowborn, the last of a bloodline that had been hunted to extinction. Her mother had died protecting that secret, and now there were people, dangerous, organized people, who wanted to claim her like property. But she also had Kyle, and a chance to learn control. And for the first time in her life, people who saw her as something more than just an Omega to be dismissed. Lyra finished eating and lay back on the bed. Kale's bed, she realized, in his private quarters, surrounded by his scent and his possessions. The intimacy of it should have felt strange, but instead it was comforting. Safe. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under. Dawn came too quickly. Lyra woke to find Aldrich already in the room, seated in the chair Kyle had occupied the night before, watching her with those unnerving clouded eyes. Good. You're awake. Get dressed. We have a long walk ahead of us. The meditation caves were exactly as remote as Aldrich had promised. A 3-hour hike into the mountains, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound through forests and over rocky outcroppings that would have been treacherous in winter. By the time they arrived, Lyra's legs were burning, and her breath came in white clouds. The caves themselves were ancient, their entrances marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Aldrich led her into the largest one, where the walls were covered in more of the strange markings, and the air thrummed with a power Lyra could feel in her bones. This place was built by Shadowborn, Aldrich explained, setting down the pack he'd carried. Before the purges, they used it to train young wolves who showed signs of the bloodline power. The symbols amplify and contain magical energy, making it safer to practice without accidentally destroying everything around you. How do you know so much about Shadowborn? Lyra asked. Aldrich's smile was sad. Because I was meant to be one of the hunters. 300 years ago, when I was young and foolish, I joined the coalition that sought to eliminate your kind. We believed we were protecting the world from dangerous abominations. He gestured to his clouded eyes. Then I met a Shadowborn woman who could have killed me with a thought. Instead, she showed me mercy and opened my eyes, quite literally, to a different kind of sight. I've spent the last 3 centuries trying to atone for the role I played in the genocide. Lyra stared at him. You're 300 years old? Give or take. Shadowborn magic has a way of extending life in those it touches. Aldrich's expression turned serious. But we're not here to discuss ancient history. We're here to make sure you don't accidentally kill yourself or anyone else. So, let's begin. The training was nothing like Lyra expected. There was no meditation, no breathing exercises, no gentle introduction to her powers. Instead, Aldrich immediately began pushing her, verbally, emotionally, forcing her to confront every insecurity, every fear, every moment of self-hatred she'd ever experienced. You're weak, he said calmly, circling her. Everyone in your pack knew it. That's why they treated you like dirt. That's why Ronan rejected you. Because deep down you believed you deserved it. Lyra's hands clenched into fists. That's not fair. Fair. You think power cares about fair? Your emotions fuel the magic, girl. Every moment of shame, every instant of rage, every drop of pain you've ever swallowed down, it's all there, waiting. And if you can't face it, can't control it, it will explode out of you at the worst possible moment. I can control myself. Prove it. Aldrich's voice dropped to a whisper. Tell me why you really saved the king in that storm. Was it compassion, or was it because you saw a chance to matter, to be important to someone powerful, to finally escape the worthlessness that's defined your entire existence? The words hit like physical blows. Lyra felt heat building in her chest, the same heat that had preceded the explosion in the archives. "Stop it," she said through gritted teeth. "Make me." Aldrich's smile was cruel. "Use your power. Shut me up. Prove you're not just a scared little Omega plane dress-up in a world that will never accept you." The heat became fire, roaring through Lyra's veins, demanding release. Her vision went silver at the edges. The cave walls trembled. "That's it," Aldrich encouraged. "Let it out. Show me what you really are." Lyra wanted to. She wanted to release the power, to prove she was strong, to make him stop saying these terrible things. But underneath the rage, underneath the hurt, she felt something else. Fear. Not of Aldrich, but of herself, of what she might do if she lost control again. "No," she gasped out. "No?" Aldrich's eyebrows rose. "You'd rather let me insult you? Rather prove me right about your weakness?" "I'd rather not hurt anyone else." The words tore out of Lyra with raw honesty. "I broke bones last night. I destroyed irreplaceable records. I could have killed Kyle. So no, I'm not going to lose control just because you're saying cruel things. I'm better than that." The heat in her chest didn't disappear, but it changed, became something she could hold, could shape, could direct. The silver faded from her vision. The walls stopped trembling. Aldrich's cruel smile transformed into something genuine. "Good. Very good." "What?" Lyra was shaking, her whole body trembling with the effort of containing the power. The first lesson of Shadowborn magic. Emotion is the trigger, but control comes from choosing which emotions to act on. Aldrich moved closer, his expression gentle now. "I needed to make you angry enough to access your power, then force you to choose control over release. Many Shadowborn never learn that lesson. They let the power use them instead of the other way around." Lyra wanted to be angry at the manipulation, but she was too exhausted. The effort of holding back the power had drained her completely. She sank to the cave floor, her legs giving out. "How long will the training take?" she asked. "As long as it takes." Aldrich sat beside her, cross-legged, despite his apparent age. "But you've already passed the hardest test. You chose control when every instinct screamed at you to let go. That's more than most wolves could manage on their first day." They trained for hours. Aldrich pushed her again and again, finding every emotional trigger, every weak point, forcing Lyra to access her power and then control it. By midday, she could summon the silver light without losing control. By afternoon, she could shape it into simple forms, spheres of energy that floated above her palm, warm and strange and entirely hers. "The power responds to visualization," Aldrich explained. "You imagine what you want it to do, and it tries to comply. But be careful, vague intentions create unpredictable results. When you exploded in the archives, you wanted the threat to stop. The power interpreted that as destroy everything. So I need to be specific. Extremely specific. Think of it like giving orders to an extremely powerful but literal-minded servant. Protect me might create a shield, or might kill everyone in a 100-yard radius. Create a barrier of light between me and that wolf is much safer." They practiced visualization until Lyra's head pounded, creating barriers, dismissing them, shaping energy into different forms. It was exhausting in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Her mind felt wrung out, stretched thin, struggling to hold the precise mental images that kept the power under control. "Enough," Aldrich finally said. "Any more, and you'll burn out. We'll continue tomorrow." The walk back to the fortress felt twice as long. Lyra's legs were leaden, her thoughts scattered, but underneath the exhaustion was something new, a sense of accomplishment. She had accessed her power deliberately and controlled it. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Kyle was waiting for her when she arrived. He took one look at her face and immediately dismissed the guards who had been accompanying them. "How bad was it?" he asked quietly. "Brutal," Lyra admitted, "but effective. I can summon the power now without losing control. I can shape it into simple forms. It's nowhere near enough to be useful in a real fight, but it's progress." Kyle's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing naturally. That's all anyone can ask. They walked through the fortress together, and Lyra noticed something different. The wolves they passed still stared. She doubted that would ever stop. But the fear in their eyes had shifted slightly. Now it was mixed with something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or respect. Word had spread about the training, about the Shadowborn who was learning control instead of hiding from her power. In the great hall, dinner was being served. Kael led Lyra to the high table, a position of honor that would have been unthinkable for an Omega just days ago. The council members who were present nodded to her with varying degrees of warmth. Even Mira managed a stiff acknowledgement. The mage talked, Marcus said without preamble, sliding into the seat across from them. Or rather, one of our truth speakers finally cracked his mental defenses. What he told us, it's not good. Kael's expression hardened. Tell me. There's a group called the Covenant. They've been operating in the shadows for decades, maybe centuries. Their goal is to control bloodlines, specifically to breed wolves with rare genetic traits for magical purposes. They've been responsible for at least a dozen kidnappings over the last 50 years, all targeting wolves with unusual abilities. Lyra felt her blood run cold. And now they want me. Not just you, they want your children. Specifically, children fathered by a powerful alpha. Marcus glanced at Kael. The combination of Shadowborn genetics and the Alpha King's bloodline would create something unprecedented. Power on a scale that hasn't been seen since the original Shadowborn walked the earth. They can want all they like, Kael said flatly. They're not getting anywhere near her. There's more. Marcus's expression was grim. The mage said the Covenant has operatives in every major pack in the north. Sleeper agents who've been positioned for years, waiting for the right moment. We can't trust anyone outside this fortress, and maybe not everyone inside it either. The implications were staggering. An invisible network of enemies embedded so deeply that they were impossible to root out. Anyone could be Covenant. The guard at the gate, the servant who brought meals, the council member who smiled and nodded. We need to accelerate Lyra's training, Kael decided. If the Covenant makes another attempt, she needs to be able to defend herself. Aldrich says rushing could be dangerous, and leaving her vulnerable is guaranteed to be dangerous. Kael's jaw was set. We work with the timeline we have, not the one we wish we had. 3 weeks passed in a blur of brutal training and escalating tension. Lyra spent every dawn to dusk in the meditation caves with Aldrich, pushing her abilities further each day. She learned to create shields strong enough to stop arrows. She learned to channel energy into focused blasts that could shatter stone. She learned to sense other wolves' intentions through the subtle magic that connected all living things. But most importantly, she learned about herself. The power wasn't separate from who she was. It was her, distilled and amplified. Every fear, every hope, every moment of strength or weakness was reflected in how the magic manifested. When she felt confident, the power came easily. When she doubted herself, it sputtered and failed. You're still fighting your Omega nature, Aldrich observed one afternoon, watching Lyra struggle to maintain a complex shield pattern. You think being Omega makes you weak, so the power reflects that belief. I've spent my whole life being told Omegas are weak, Lyra said through gritted teeth, sweat dripping down her face. It's not exactly easy to unlearn. Then stop trying to unlearn it and start reframing it. Aldrich tapped his walking stick against the cave floor. What if being Omega isn't about weakness? What if it's about something else entirely? Lyra let the shield collapse, too exhausted to maintain it. Like what? Adaptability, survival, the ability to endure what would break stronger wolves. Aldrich's milky eyes seemed to see straight through her. Alphas lead through dominance, betas support through loyalty. But Omegas? Omegas survive. They bend without breaking. They find strength in places others would never think to look. That's not weakness, child. That's the most dangerous kind of power there is. The word settled into Lyra's chest like a key turning in a lock. She thought about this blizzard where she'd kept Kael alive with nothing but determination and scraps. She thought about the healing wing where she'd learned to set bones on the fly. She thought about every moment in her life when she'd been underestimated and had survived anyway, not despite being Omega, because of it. Try again, Aldrich said. But this time, don't fight what you are. Use it. Lyra closed her eyes and reached for her power. But instead of trying to force it into the shape she thought it should take, she let it flow naturally, guided by instinct rather than rigid visualization. The shield that formed was different from anything she'd created before. It wasn't a wall of solid energy. It was flexible, adaptive, shifting and flowing like water to meet each new threat. When Aldrich threw a stone at it, the shield bent around the projectile and gently deflected it aside instead of shattering from the impact. "There," Aldrich said, satisfaction clear in his voice. "That shadowborn power filtered through Omega nature. Impossible to break because it never stands rigid, always adapting, always surviving." Lyra opened her eyes and saw the shield shimmering around her, silver and beautiful and absolutely her own. For the first time, the power didn't feel like a foreign thing she was trying to control. It felt like an extension of herself. "I understand," she breathed. "Good. Now, we can begin the real training." The real training made everything that had come before look gentle. Aldrich pushed Lyra to her absolute limits and then past them, forcing her to use her power in increasingly complex ways while exhausted, hurt, or emotionally compromised. He hired warriors to attack her without warning, forcing her to defend herself while mentally and physically drained. He created scenarios designed to trigger her worst fears and made her maintain control through all of it. It was brutal. Lyra collapsed more nights than she cared to count. Her body pushed beyond what she thought possible. But she was getting stronger, not just magically, physically and mentally too. The Omega who had left Iron Ridge 4 weeks ago wouldn't have recognized the woman she was becoming. During the 4th week, everything changed. Lyra was in the meditation cave, practicing defensive shields against Aldrich's increasingly creative attacks, when a runner burst into the entrance. He was young, barely out of adolescence, and his face was pale with fear. "Master Aldrich, the fortress is under attack. The Covenant, they're here." The world seemed to stop. "How many?" Aldrich's voice was sharp, all traces of the elderly teacher gone, replaced by the warrior he'd once been. "Hundreds. Maybe more. They have mages, warriors, siege equipment. This isn't a raid, it's an army." Aldrich turned to Lyra, his expression grave. "This is what we've been preparing for. Are you ready?" Lyra thought about Kael, fighting to defend his people. She thought about the healers who would be desperately trying to save lives. She thought about Marcus and the guards, and everyone who had slowly begun to accept her despite their fears. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." They ran. The fortress was chaos. Smoke rose from multiple points along the walls. The sounds of battle echoed through the courtyards, steel on steel, wolves snarling, screams of pain and rage. Bodies littered the ground, some wearing the Northern Guard's colors, others in unfamiliar armor marked with symbols that made Lyra's power recoil. Covenant symbols. "The king is at the main gate," someone shouted as they passed. "They're trying to breach." An explosion cut off the rest. The northern tower erupted in flames, stone and debris raining down on the courtyard below. Lyra watched in horror as wolves scattered, some not fast enough to escape the falling rubble. "Stay focused," Aldrich ordered. "You can't help anyone if you lose control. Remember your training." Lyra nodded, forcing herself to breathe, to center. The power was already rising in response to the danger, but she shaped it carefully, deliberately. A shield formed around her and Aldrich as they ran toward the main gate, flexible and adaptive, exactly as she'd been taught. They found Kael at the center of a maelstrom of violence. He was in wolf form, black and massive and terrifying, leading a group of his best warriors against a force that easily tripled their numbers. But the Covenant fighters weren't ordinary rogues. They moved with military precision, supported by mages who threw fire and force and shadows that weren't natural. One of those shadow attacks slammed into Kael, knocking him aside. He hit the ground hard and didn't immediately rise. Lyra's heart stopped. Before thought, before fear, before anything else, she moved. The power erupted from her, not wild this time, but controlled, precise, shaped by weeks of brutal training and the absolute certainty that she would not watch Kael die. Silver light exploded across the battlefield, and everything stopped. The Covenant fighters froze mid-attack, held in place by threads of energy that Lyra had summoned without conscious thought. The mage's spells fizzled and died, unable to manifest against the wave of shadowborn power that now dominated the space. Even the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Lyra walked forward, her eyes blazing silver, her hands crackling with barely contained energy. She wasn't the scared Omega anymore. She wasn't even the student learning to control her power. She was Shadowborn, and she was done hiding. "Stand down," she said, her voice carrying across the frozen battlefield with supernatural clarity. "Or I will end you all." For a moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, one of the Covenant mages stepped forward. He was older, distinguished, wearing robes that marked him as high-ranking. "Impressive," he said calmly. "The reports about your awakening didn't do you justice. But holding this many wolves simultaneously? That must be exhausting. How long can you maintain it, I wonder?" He was right. Already Lyra could feel the strain. Holding this many people, maintaining this much control, it was like trying to hold back a flood with her bare hands. She had minutes at best before her strength gave out. "Long enough," she said, praying it was true. The mage smiled. "Then let's test that." He moved his hand in a complex gesture, and reality tore. Lyra had never seen real rift magic before, the kind that could open doorways between places, that bent space itself. But she felt it, felt the wrongness as a hole opened in the air behind her. And through that hole stepped something that made every instinct Lyra had scream in terror. It was wolf-shaped, but wrong. Its fur the color of void, its eyes burning with a light that hurt to see. It radiated power that dwarfed even what Lyra had felt from her own abilities. "This be," the Covenant mage said pleasantly, "is what we can create with proper bloodline breeding. 3 generations of carefully selected matings, all leading to this. Our magnum opus, our proof that we can reshape the very nature of wolves themselves." The creature moved, faster than anything that size should be able to, straight toward Lyra. She released her hold on the Covenant fighters. She had no choice, needed every bit of power to face this new threat, and threw up a shield. The creature hit it like a battering ram. The shield held, but barely. Around her, the battle resumed. Kyle was on his feet again, rallying his warriors, but they were still outnumbered. And now they faced not just the Covenant army, but this abomination that the mages had created. The creature attacked again, and this time Lyra's shield cracked. She was going to die. She'd learned control, learned to shape her power, spent weeks training, and it still wasn't going to be enough. Then Kale was beside her, shifting back to human form, his hand finding hers. "Together," he said simply. The mate bond, which had been growing stronger every day they spent together, suddenly blazed to life. Power flowed through it. Kael's alpha strength mixing with Lyra's shadowborn magic, creating something neither of them could have achieved alone. The shield reformed, stronger than before. Not just Lyra's flexible, adaptive defense. Now it had the raw power of an alpha king behind it. "How?" Lyra gasped. "Mate bonds can channel power between partners," Kael said, his voice strained with effort. "I'm trusting you with everything I have. Use it." Lyra looked at the abomination, at the Covenant mage who was watching with fascinated interest, at the battle raging around them. She thought about everything she'd learned, everything she'd become, and she made a choice. Instead of defending, she attacked. The silver light that erupted from her was nothing like the wild explosion in the archives. This was controlled, precise, shaped by weeks of training and powered by the combined strength of a Shadowborn and an Alpha King. It hit the abomination like a hammer of pure force. The creature dissolved, simply ceased to exist, unable to withstand the power of 2 bonded souls working in perfect harmony. The Covenant mage's eyes widened. "Impossible. The bond isn't complete. You shouldn't be able to—" "You don't know anything about us," Lyra said, advancing on him. The silver light still crackled around her, but she was in control, absolutely and completely. "You see bloodlines and breeding pairs. We're wolves. We're mates. And we're done being afraid of you." She raised her hand, ready to end this, to destroy the mage and scatter his army. "Lyra, wait!" Kael's voice cut through her focus. She stopped, the power thrumming against her palm, desperate for release. "If you kill him, we learn nothing about the Covenant," Kael said. "We need him alive. We need answers." Every instinct screamed at Lyra to finish this, to eliminate the threat. But Kael was right, and more than that, he was trusting her to make the right choice, to choose justice over vengeance. Slowly, carefully, Lyra lowered her hand. The power didn't dissipate. She kept it ready, kept the mage pinned in place with threads of silver energy, but she didn't kill. "Surrender," she told him, "or I let the power decide your fate." The Covenant mage looked at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled. You've won today, he said. But this changes nothing. The Covenant has existed for centuries, will exist for centuries more. And sooner or later, Lyra Shadowborn, you'll belong to us. Never, Lyra said. We'll see. Before anyone could stop him, the mage bit down on something. A tooth, Lyra realized with horror, filled with poison. He was dead before he hit the ground. The remaining Covenant forces, seeing their leader fall, began to retreat. Some shifted and ran. Others disappeared through rifts their own mages opened. Within minutes, the battlefield was empty except for Kael's wolves and the bodies of the fallen. They'd won. But the victory felt hollow. Lyra's legs gave out and Kael caught her, lowering them both to the ground. The power finally released its grip, flowing back into whatever deep place it lived inside her. She was exhausted beyond measure, but alive. They were both alive. You did it, Kael said softly, pulling her against his chest. You saved us all. Around them, the surviving warriors were staring, not with fear this time, but with something that looked like awe. The Shadowborn who had learned to control her power. The Omega who had fought beside their king and won. Marcus approached, limping slightly but grinning. Well, that was impressive. Is it over? Lyra asked. For now, Marcus's expression sobered. But the mage was right about one thing. The Covenant won't stop. They'll regroup, find new approaches. We're in this for the long haul. Lyra looked up at Kael, saw her own exhaustion and determination reflected in his golden eyes, and felt the mate bond pulse between them, stronger now, deeper, forged in battle and trust and the choice to fight together rather than apart. Then we'll face them together, she said, however long it takes. Kael smiled and pressed his forehead to hers. Together. As dawn broke over the fortress, painting the smoke-stained sky in shades of gold and pink, Lyra felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting. She was powerful. She was exactly who she was meant to be. The Omega no one wanted had become the Shadowborn everyone needed. And this was only the beginning. The aftermath of the battle stretched across 3 days of smoke, blood, and the kind of exhaustion that settled into bones and refused to leave. Lyra moved through the healing wing like a ghost, using what remained of her strength to help tend the wounded. Her power was depleted, completely drained after the fight with the Covenant, but her hands still worked, and there were always more injuries than healers. On the morning of the 4th day, a messenger arrived from Iron Ridge. Lyra was helping Elena change bandages on a warrior who'd lost an eye to a Covenant blade when Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "The king requests your presence in the council chamber," he said. "There are visitors." Something in his tone made Lyra's stomach clench. What kind of visitors? The kind you should see for yourself. Lyra followed Marcus through corridors that still showed signs of battle. Scorch marks on stone, broken furniture pushed against walls, windows that hadn't yet been repaired. The fortress had held, but barely. If the Covenant returned with that kind of force again, she pushed the thought aside, one crisis at a time. The council chamber doors were open, and Lyra could hear voices inside, familiar voices that made her steps falter. "Cannot simply ignore pack law because it's convenient," someone was saying. Alpha Ronan's voice, smooth and commanding. The Omega in question was a member of Iron Ridge. She left without permission, without proper release from her obligations. Technically, Kael's voice cut through like ice. She's under my protection. And unless Iron Ridge wants to formally challenge the Alpha King's authority over his own mate, I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. Lyra stepped through the doorway, and the conversation died. The council chamber was crowded. Kael sat in his chair at the center of the semicircle, his posture deceptively relaxed, but his eyes hard as stone. The council members flanked him, their expressions ranging from supportive to wary. And standing in the center of the room, looking distinctly uncomfortable, were 3 wolves from Iron Ridge. Alpha Ronan, his beta, Marcus. Not the same Marcus who served Kael, but the one who had stood silently while Ronan rejected her. And Sarah, Lyra's former best friend, whose face was pale and drawn. Ronan's eyes locked onto Lyra, and she saw shock flicker across his features. She knew what he was seeing, not the small, defeated Omega he'd rejected 5 weeks ago, but someone fundamentally changed. Her posture was different, straighter. Her eyes were different, no longer downcast but meeting his directly. Even the air around her felt different, charged with barely contained power that made every wolf in the room aware of her presence. "Lyra," Ronan said, and his voice was warmer than she remembered. "You look well. What do you want?" Lyra kept her voice level, emotionless. "We heard about the attack," Sarah spoke up, stepping forward. "The whole territory is talking about how a Shadowborn fought beside the Alpha King and defeated the Covenant. When we realized it was you—" She trailed off, her eyes shining with something that looked like pride but felt hollow. "You came all this way to congratulate me?" Lyra's tone made it clear she didn't believe that for a second. Ronan cleared his throat. "We came because certain facts have come to light. About your lineage. About what you truly are. I'm aware of my lineage." "Then you understand that changes things significantly." Ronan took a step closer, his alpha presence pushing outward. A subtle dominance display that would have made Lyra's Omega instinct scream just weeks ago. Now, she barely noticed it. "The rejection was made under false pretenses. I believed you to be a simple Omega with no special qualities. Had I known about your Shadowborn blood—" "You would have what?" Lyra's voice was dangerously quiet. "Accepted me? Treasured me? Treated me like I mattered?" "Yes," Ronan said simply. "The mate bond was real, Lyra. It still is, technically. A rejection can be rescinded if both parties agree. We could—" "No." The word fell like a hammer. Ronan blinked. "You haven't even heard what I'm offering. Iron Ridge would welcome you back. You'd be Luna, with all the respect and authority that position deserves. Your bloodline would strengthen the pack immeasurably. Our children would belong to you," Lyra finished, "just like the Covenant wanted. I'd be valuable breeding stock, right? A way to elevate Iron Ridge's status and power?" "That's not—" Ronan's expression shifted to something like frustration. "I'm trying to make this right. To give you what you deserve." "What I deserve." Lyra felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. "Let me tell you what I deserved, Ronan. I deserved a mate who saw my worth before I had power. I deserved a pack that didn't treat me like dirt because of my rank. I deserved basic respect as a living being, not because of my bloodline, but because I existed." She took a step forward, and Ronan actually stepped back, an alpha retreating from an omega. The council members noticed. Everyone noticed. "You had your chance," Lyra continued. "You looked at me, at our mate bond, at everything we could have been together, and you decided I wasn't enough. You rejected me publicly, humiliated me, and let me walk away believing I was worthless. And now that you know I'm Shadowborn, suddenly I'm worth reconsidering? Lyra, please. I accepted your rejection." Her voice was absolute. "That bond is broken, dead. Whatever you feel now isn't real. It's just greed dressed up as regret." Sarah spoke up, her voice trembling. "We miss you. The pack misses you. I miss you." Lyra turned to her former friend, and some of the coldness in her chest thawed slightly. Sarah had been kind, at least, had tried to comfort her after the rejection, but even Sarah had never questioned the system that kept Omegas at the bottom, had never challenged the casual cruelty that Lyra had endured daily. "I miss who I thought you were too," Lyra said softly. "But that friendship was built on me being small and you being kind to someone beneath you. I'm not that person anymore, Sarah. And I can't go back to being her." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but she nodded, understanding. Cale rose from his chair, his presence filling the room. "Iron Ridge's petition is denied. Lyra Vale is under the protection of the Northern Territories and recognized as my mate. Any attempt to claim her, legally or otherwise, will be considered an act of war. Am I understood?" Ronan's jaw tightened, but he wasn't stupid enough to challenge an Alpha King in his own fortress. "Understood." "Good. You have 1 hour to be off my lands. If I see any Iron Ridge wolves after that, I'll assume they're spies and treat them accordingly." It was a dismissal, clear and absolute. Ronan shot one last look at Lyra, something complicated that mixed regret and frustration and barely concealed anger, then turned and left. His beta followed immediately. Sarah lingered at the door. "I really am happy for you," she said quietly. You deserve all of this. I'm sorry I never told you that before." Then she was gone, and Lyra was left standing in a room full of wolves who had witnessed her former alpha trying and failing to reclaim her. Elena Frost spoke first. "Well, that was satisfying." Several council members chuckled, and Lyra felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. "Are you all right?" Kael asked, moving to her side. "I think so." Lyra took a shaky breath. "Part of me expected to feel something when I saw him. Anger, maybe, or pain, but there was just nothing. He's a stranger who hurt me once, that's all." "That's growth," Kael's Marcus, said with approval. "And a damn fine speech. The way you put him in his place? Beautiful." "I meant every word." Lyra looked up at Kael. "I hope you know that. When I said the bond was dead, I know." Kael's hand found hers, warm and solid. "The bond between us is real. I've never doubted it." "Actually," Elena interjected, her sharp eyes moving between them, "that brings us to an important discussion. The mate bond is forming, but it's not complete. And given the Covenant's continued interest in your bloodline, Lyra, we need to address the question of formalization." Lyra frowned. "Formalization?" "A mating ceremony," Elena explained. "Public recognition of the bond, witnessed by the pack, and sealed with the traditional rituals. It would make your position here official and unquestionable. It would also strengthen the bond itself, making it much harder for anyone to try to break or manipulate through magic." The idea sent a thrill of something through Lyra, excitement mixed with terror. A mating ceremony meant commitment, permanence. It meant choosing Kael not just as a temporary ally, but as a partner for life. "I know this is fast," Kael said quietly, clearly reading her hesitation. "We've known each other barely 6 weeks. If you need more time—" "It's not about time." Lyra squeezed his hand. "It's about making sure this is real, that we're choosing each other for the right reasons, not because of prophecy or bloodlines or political convenience." "Then let me be very clear about my reasons." Kael turned to face her fully, his golden eyes intense. "I'm choosing you because you're brave enough to run into a blizzard to save a dying stranger, because you fought beside healers when you could have hidden, because you learned to control power that would have destroyed a weaker person, because you stood up to your former alpha and told him exactly what you deserved." He cupped her face gently with his free hand. "I'm choosing you because every day I spend with you, I discover something new to admire. Your strength, your compassion, your stubborn refusal to give up even when everything seems impossible. I'm choosing you because when I imagine my future, you're in every vision. Not as a political advantage or a bloodline enhancement, but as my partner, my equal, my mate." Lyra felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm choosing you because you're the first person who ever saw me as more than my rank, because you trusted me with your life before you knew anything about my power, because you've never once asked me to be anything other than exactly who I am." She rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet, in front of the entire council. When they broke apart, Kael was smiling, the genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "That's a yes." The council chamber erupted in cheers. The mating ceremony was scheduled for the next full moon, 2 weeks away, which Elena declared was barely enough time to prepare, but would have to do given the circumstances. The fortress transformed overnight from a place of recovery to one of celebration. Workers repaired battle damage with renewed energy. Servants began preparing for the influx of guests who would attend from across the northern territories. And Lyra found herself swept up in traditions she'd never expected to participate in. "The Luna's dress must be white and silver," Nira explained, draping fabric across Lyra's shoulders while a seamstress took measurements, "to represent the moon and the bond. And you'll wear the northern crown during the ceremony. It's been in the Alpha King's family for 500 years. "I'm not technically a Luna yet," Lyra pointed out. "You will be in 2 weeks. Might as well get used to the title." Nira grinned. "Besides, the whole territory is thrilled. Do you know how long it's been since we had a proper mating ceremony? King Kael's been unattached for 10 years. Everyone had given up hope he'd ever find a mate." Lyra studied herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was still sometimes a stranger, confident, powerful, wearing clothes that actually fit properly instead of hand-me-downs. But she was getting used to this new reflection, learning to see herself the way others apparently saw her. What if I'm not good at being Luna? The fear slipped out before she could stop it. I was raised Omega. I don't know how to lead, how to command respect, how to… Lyra. Nira's hand on her shoulder was gentle but firm. You fought the Covenant and won. You learned to control Shadowborn power in a matter of weeks. You faced down your former Alpha without flinching. If you can do all that, you can learn to be Luna. That's different. That was survival. And you think being Luna isn't? Nira laughed. Leadership is just another kind of survival, except you're responsible for others too. You'll figure it out, and you'll have help, the king, the council, people like me who want to see you succeed. The words settled some of Lyra's anxiety. Not all of it, but enough to breathe. Training with Aldrich continued, though it shifted focus. Instead of pure control, they worked on integration, learning to access her power quickly in high-stress situations, combining it with her Omega instincts rather than fighting against them, understanding the limits of what she could safely do without burning out completely. The ceremony will drain you, Aldrich warned during one session. The ritual involves channeling significant magical energy to seal the mate bond. Given your Shadowborn nature, that energy will be amplified. You need to be prepared for what it will feel like. How bad are we talking? Imagine the worst exhaustion you've ever experienced, multiplied by 10, while also feeling the most intense emotional connection to another person you've ever had, also multiplied by 10. Aldrich's expression was serious. Some wolves faint during the ritual. Others become overwhelmed and shift involuntarily. You need to maintain control through all of it. They practiced energy management, channeling power in sustained flows rather than explosive bursts, maintaining awareness while exhausted, grounding herself in physical sensations when magical ones threatened to overwhelm. It was brutally difficult work, but Lyra understood why it was necessary. She would not faint during her own mating ceremony. She would not lose control. She would prove, once and for all, that she was strong enough to be Luna. The day before the full moon, unexpected visitors arrived. Lyra was in the courtyard watching younger wolves practice combat drills when the gates opened to admit a delegation unlike any she'd seen before. They were clearly wolves, but their bearing and dress marked them as foreign, southern territories maybe, or even from beyond the northern borders entirely. The leader was a woman who radiated authority in a way that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with presence. She was perhaps 50, with dark skin and silver-streaked hair braided in intricate patterns. Her eyes, when they landed on Lyra, were knowing. Lyra Shadowborn, the woman said, her voice rich and warm. I am Marissa Blackwater, Alpha of the Crescent Moon Pack. I've come a very long way to meet you. Kale appeared at Lyra's side instantly, his body language protective. Alpha Marissa, this is unexpected. Forgive the short notice, King Kael, but when I heard that a Shadowborn had awakened and was preparing to complete a mate bond with the Alpha King himself, Marissa smiled. Well, I had to see it with my own eyes. Why? Lyra asked directly. Because I'm Shadowborn too, and I thought you should know you're not as alone as you believe. The revelation sent shockwaves through everyone present. Lyra stared at this woman who carried herself with such confidence, trying to reconcile her with the stories of extinct bloodlines and hunted wolves. That's impossible, Marcus said. The Shadowborn were wiped out centuries ago. Most of them were, Marissa agreed, but a few survived by hiding, by diluting their blood through generations of careful breeding with ordinary wolves. Your mother did it one way, Lyra, teaching you to suppress your power completely. My family did it differently. We fled to the southern territories where the purges never reached, and we've lived openly for 300 years. Openly? Lyra could barely process this. There are more of you? About 200, spread across 5 packs in the south. We've kept a low profile, never drawing attention to our abilities, never giving anyone reason to fear us the way the ancients were feared. But we exist. We survive. And when I heard about your awakening, Marissa stepped closer. I wanted you to know that the Shadowborn story doesn't end in tragedy. It can end in strength, in community, in a future where our power is used to protect rather than destroy. Tears burned in Lyra's eyes. She'd spent weeks believing she was the last, the only one carrying this dangerous legacy. To learn there were others, that she wasn't alone. Why didn't you come forward before? Kyle asked, his tone suspicious. If there are 200 Shadowborn in the south, why hide it? Because coming forward means becoming targets, Marissa said simply. The Covenant has been hunting Shadowborn for decades. Every time one of us reveals ourselves, we risk not just our own lives but the lives of our entire community. But Lyra has already been exposed. The Covenant knows about her, and I thought she deserved to know that if she needs help, if she needs training or support, or just someone who understands what it's like to carry this power, we're here. She reached into her robes and pulled out a small pendant on a silver chain. The symbol carved into it made Lyra's power stir in recognition. Ancient, Shadowborn, a mark that represented pack and family and belonging. This is for you, Marissa said, pressing it into Lyra's hand. A reminder that you're part of something bigger than yourself. And an open invitation, if you ever want to visit the South, to meet your extended family, you'll always be welcome. Lyra looked down at the pendant, then back up at this woman who had traveled hundreds of miles just to offer hope to a stranger. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea what this means. I think I do, Marissa smiled. I was 19 when my power awakened, terrified, alone, convinced I was a monster. Having others who understood made all the difference. Now go. Prepare for your ceremony, and know that you have the support of the Southern Shadowborn, whatever comes next. The delegation stayed for dinner, a grand affair where Marissa regaled the court with stories of the Southern territories and subtly demonstrated her own abilities. Small things, carefully controlled, but enough to show that Shadowborn power didn't have to be destructive. It could be beautiful, useful, a gift rather than a curse. That night, alone in her chambers, Lyra held the pendant and let herself cry, not from sadness, but from relief. She wasn't alone. She wasn't a monster. She was part of a legacy that had survived against impossible odds, and she was about to add her own chapter to that story. The full moon rose clear and bright, painting the fortress in silver light. Lyra stood in her chambers wearing the white and silver dress that had taken a week to create. It was beautiful, simple in design but exquisite in execution, with embroidery that caught the light and made her look like she was wrapped in moonbeams. The northern crown rested on a cushion nearby, waiting to be placed on her head during the ceremony. Are you ready? Elena asked, appearing in the doorway. No, Lyra admitted, but I'm doing this anyway. Elena smiled. That's all any of us can do. Come, it's time. The ceremony took place in the fortress's great hall, which had been transformed into something magical. Hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows on the walls. The floor was strewn with white flowers that released a sweet scent with every step. And every wolf in the northern territories who could make the journey had come to witness. The hall was packed to capacity, with more spilling out into the courtyards beyond. Lyra walked down the center aisle, her head held high, and felt hundreds of eyes on her. Not with fear this time, or contempt, but with respect, wonder, acceptance. At the end of the aisle stood Kyle, wearing ceremonial armor and furs that marked his status as king. His eyes locked onto her the moment she appeared, and the mate bond between them surged to life. Anticipation and love and absolute certainty flowing through the connection. Master Aldrich officiated, his ancient voice carrying across the hushed crowd. We gather under the full moon to witness the completion of a sacred bond. Two souls chosen by fate, choosing each other in return. This is not a joining of convenience or politics, but of hearts and spirits that recognize each other as true mates. He gestured to Lyra and Kale to join hands. The moment their skin touched, silver light began to glow around them, Shadowborn magic responding to the ritual, amplifying what was already there. Kyle Draven, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, do you accept this bond freely and completely? Do you pledge to honor, protect, and cherish your mate for all your days? I do, Kale said, his voice strong and clear. Lyra Shadowborn, last daughter of the ancient bloodline, do you accept this bond freely and completely? Do you pledge to honor, protect, and cherish your mate for all your days? I do. Lyra's voice rang out across the hall. The silver light intensified, wrapping around them both like living ribbons. Lyra felt the bond in her chest expand, deepen, become something permanent and unbreakable. It was overwhelming. She could feel Kyle's emotions as clearly as her own, could sense his presence like a second heartbeat, could see the future they would build together stretching out in infinite possibility. The exhaustion Aldrich had warned about crashed over her like a wave. Her legs wavered, but Kyl's arms were already there, steadying her, holding her upright. "I've got you," he whispered. "Always." "Besides, Amashi." Aldrich placed the northern crown on Lyra's head, a circlet of silver and moonstone that had been worn by Luna Queens for 500 years. It settled into place like it had been made for her, and Lyra felt the weight of it, not just physically, but symbolically. This was real. She was Luna now, Queen of the Northern Territories. By the power vested in me and witnessed by this pack, I declare Kyle and Lyra bonded mates, partners for life, Alpha King and Luna Queen of the Northern Territories. Aldrich's smile was genuine. "You may seal your bond." Kale kissed her, and the crowd erupted in cheers. The silver light exploded outward in a gentle wave that washed over everyone present. Shadowborn magic blessing the entire pack, strengthening bonds, healing old wounds. It was the most beautiful thing Lyra had ever created with her power. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kyle was grinning like he'd just won a war. "Hello, my queen," he said. "Hello, my king," Lyra replied. The celebration that followed lasted until dawn. There was music and dancing, food and drink, wolves from every pack in the territory coming forward to offer their congratulations. Lyra danced with Kyle, with Marcus, with Elena, with warriors and healers and servants who just weeks ago had looked at her with fear. Marissa approached near midnight, her smile warm. "You did beautifully. The control you showed, channeling that much power without losing yourself, your mother would have been proud." "I wish she could have seen this," Lyra said softly. "She did. In every choice she made to keep you safe, in every lesson she taught you about survival, she was preparing you for this moment. You're living the future she died to protect." Marissa squeezed Lyra's hand. "And you're not just surviving anymore. You're thriving." As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Kale led Lyra to the balcony where he'd first shown her the vast territory she would help protect. The sun was rising, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink. "6 weeks ago, I was dying in a blizzard," Kyle said quietly, "convinced I'd never wake up, that my kingdom would fall into chaos, that I'd die without ever finding my mate. And then you appeared." "I was running away," Lyra pointed out, "broken and rejected and convinced I was worthless. You were surviving, the way Shadowborn always have." Kale pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Do you know what I see when I look at you now?" "What?" "Strength, not despite being Omega, but because of it. You learned to bend without breaking, to find power in places others never looked, to survive when stronger wolves would have given up. That's what made you extraordinary long before your Shadowborn abilities awakened." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You were never worthless, Lyra. The wolves who treated you that way were just too blind to see what was right in front of them." Lyra turned in his arms to face him. "I love you. I should have said it during the ceremony, but I was so overwhelmed." "I know." Kyle's smile was soft. "I felt it through the bond. I feel it now, every moment. And I love you too, more than I thought possible." They stood together on the balcony as the sun climbed higher, two souls bonded for life, watching over a territory that had become home. 3 months later, news reached the fortress that the Covenant had been dealt a devastating blow. Several of their major strongholds had been raided simultaneously by a coalition of southern packs led by Marissa Blackwater. Their leadership was in disarray. Their resources were scattered. They were no longer the organized threat they had once been. "They'll rebuild eventually," Marcus warned during a council meeting. "Groups like that always do." "Then we'll be ready," Lyra said calmly. She sat beside Kyle at the high table now, wearing the northern crown, her voice carrying the authority of a Luna who had earned every bit of respect she commanded. "We've established alliances with the southern territories. We've trained a new generation of warriors who know how to fight against magical threats. And we have something the Covenant will never have: wolves who choose to fight together instead of being forced." Elena nodded approvingly. "Well said, my queen." The title still made Lyra's heart skip sometimes, but she was learning to wear it comfortably, just like she'd learned to wear her power, her mate bond, her Shadowborn legacy, all the parts of herself that she'd once feared or denied. That evening, Lyra returned to the meditation caves for the first time since completing her training. Aldrich was there, as she'd known he would be, sitting cross-legged in the center of the main chamber. "I wondered when you'd come back," he said without opening his eyes. "I needed to thank you properly, for everything you taught me, for helping me become who I am now." Aldrich's eyes opened, milky and ancient and warm. "You did that yourself, child. I just pointed you in the right direction." "Still," Lyra sat across from him, "I want you to know that it mattered. You mattered." They sat in comfortable silence for a long moment, and then Aldrich said something unexpected. "I'm dying." Lyra's breath caught. "What?" "Old age finally catching up with me. I have perhaps a year left, maybe less." He smiled at her stricken expression. "Don't mourn, Lyra. I've lived 3 centuries longer than I had any right to. I've seen the Shadowborn rise from extinction. I've atoned for my role in the purges, and I've trained the wolf who will ensure my people's legacy continues. That's a good life. But who will teach the next Shadowborn who awakens? Who will? You will." Aldrich's tone was gentle but firm. "You've learned enough to teach others now, and with Marissa's help, with the knowledge preserved in these caves, you'll ensure that no Shadowborn ever has to face their awakening alone the way you did." Lyra felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I'm not ready. No one ever is. But you'll rise to it anyway, because that's who you are." Aldrich reached out and placed his hand over hers. "The Omega who saved a king, the Shadowborn who learned control, the queen who will protect her people with everything she has. You've already proven you can do impossible things, Lyra. Teaching is just one more." 6 weeks after that conversation, Aldrich passed peacefully in his sleep. The entire Northern Territory mourned him, but none more than Lyra, who had lost not just a teacher, but the last living link to the ancient Shadowborn. But she didn't let grief consume her. Instead, she honored his memory by doing exactly what he'd asked. She opened the meditation caves to any wolf who showed signs of unusual abilities, offering training and support and the knowledge that they weren't alone. The first student was a young alpha from a minor pack whose power manifested as the ability to sense emotions at a distance. The second was a beta who could move objects with her mind. The third was an omega, like Lyra, whose abilities were just beginning to surface. "I'm scared," the young omega whispered during their first session. "Everyone looks at me like I'm dangerous." "You are dangerous," Lyra said gently. "But dangerous doesn't mean bad. It means powerful, and power is just a tool. It's what you choose to do with it that matters." "How do I control it?" "The same way you've controlled everything else in your life." Lyra smiled, remembering Aldrich's lessons. "By accepting who you are, instead of fighting it. By finding strength in the places others overlook. By learning to bend without breaking." The Omega's eyes widened. "You're Omega too." "I am. And I'm also Queen of the Northern Territories, mate to the Alpha King, and one of the most powerful Shadowborn currently alive." Lyra's smile turned mischievous. "Turns out Omega and powerful aren't mutually exclusive. Who knew?" The young wolf laughed, and some of the fear in her eyes faded. Word of Lyra's school, because that's what it had become, a proper school for wolves with unusual abilities, spread across the territories. Parents who had once hidden their children's gifts now brought them to the northern fortress for training. Wolves who had spent their lives afraid of their own power found community and acceptance. And slowly, carefully, the stigma that had surrounded both Omegas and magical abilities began to fade. It wasn't a dramatic revolution. It was quieter than that. One wolf at a time learning that they had value, one pack at a time updating their prejudices, one generation at a time building a world where power and rank mattered less than character and choice. 5 years after the mating ceremony, Lyra stood on the balcony again, watching the sun set over the northern territories. In her arms was a small bundle. Her daughter, barely 3 months old, with golden eyes like her father and hair that already showed hints of silver. Kael appeared beside her, wrapping one arm around her waist, while his free hand gently stroked their daughter's tiny head. "She shifted today," he said, wonder in his voice. "Just for a moment. Elena says that's impossibly young." "She's half Shadowborn and half Alpha King bloodline," Lyra pointed out. Nothing about her is going to be normal. True. Kyle pressed a kiss to Lyra's temple. Are you worried about what her power will be like? No. Lyra looked down at her daughter's peaceful face. Because she'll have what I didn't. Parents who will teach her that power is a gift, a pack that will support her no matter what, and the knowledge that she's loved for exactly who she is. And a mother who conquered the impossible, Kyle added, who went from rejected Omega to Queen, who learned to control power that would have destroyed others, who built a school that's changing the entire North. His voice was filled with pride. Our daughter couldn't ask for a better role model. Lyra thought about the woman she'd been 6 years ago, broken, rejected, convinced of her own worthlessness. She thought about the journey from that frozen wilderness to this moment, every brutal lesson, every hard-won victory, every time she'd chosen to fight instead of giving up. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Taking me in, bonding with me, dealing with all the complications I brought into your life? Kale was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was absolutely certain. Not for 1 second. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Lyra. To this pack. To the entire North. And I would do it all again. The attacks, the training, the politics, everything, just to end up right here, right now, with you. Their daughter made a small sound, her tiny hand reaching toward the sunset. Lyra caught it gently, marveling at how small and perfect she was. What should we name her? Kyle asked. They'd been debating for weeks, unable to agree on anything that felt right. Lyra looked at her daughter, at Kyle, at the territory spread out before them, this place that had become home, this family she'd built from nothing, this future she'd earned through blood and tears and unshakable determination. Hope, she said softly. Her name is Hope. Because that's what she represented. Proof that broken things could heal, that rejected wolves could find their place, that Omega and powerful weren't contradictions but complements. Proof that the future could be better than the past if people were brave enough to fight for it. Kyle's smile was radiant. Hope. It's perfect. As darkness fell and the stars emerged one by one, Lyra stood with her mate and their daughter, looking out over a kingdom she'd helped protect and transform. She thought about the Omega who had wandered into a blizzard 6 years ago, expecting to die alone and forgotten. That woman would never have believed this ending was possible. But Lyra had learned something essential in those 6 years, that endings could be beginnings, that rejection could lead to something better, that the wolves who were dismissed and underestimated were often the ones who changed the world. She had been unwanted, rejected, told she was worthless. Now she was queen, mother, teacher, protector. And she had earned every single one of those titles through her own strength, her own choices, her own refusal to accept the limitations others tried to place on her. The Omega no one wanted had become the queen everyone needed, and in the harsh northern territories where only the strong survived, compassion and courage had proven to be the strongest powers of all. The end was just another beginning, and Lyra was ready for whatever came next.